The cold hit Evelyn Mercer like a fist the moment she stepped down from the freight wagon. Not the romantic, gentle snowfall she'd imagined during those long nights in Chicago when she'd stared at Cole Bennett's advertisement until the ink blurred. This was Montana cold, the kind that burned your lungs, turned your fingers numb in seconds, and made you wonder if you'd made the worst mistake of your life. She probably had. The wagon driver dropped her trunk onto the frozen mud without ceremony, tipped his hat, and climbed back onto his seat. "Good luck, miss," he said, and there was something in his tone that made it sound less like a blessing and more like a eulogy. Then he was gone, and Evelyn stood alone in the middle of Black Ridge's main street with her inadequate coat and her Chicago shoes and the growing certainty that she had traded one nightmare for another. The town looked like something God had forgotten to finish. Rough wooden buildings leaned against each other like drunks. The street was more mud than road, churned into freezing slush by horses and boots and wagon wheels. Smoke rose from chimneys in thin, desperate columns. Everything smelled like wood fires and animal waste, and something else. Something harsh and metallic that Evelyn would later learn was just the frontier itself, raw and unfiltered. But it wasn't the town that made her stomach drop. It was the people. They stared at her like she was a curiosity in a traveling show. Miners with dirt-crusted faces, cowboys with wind-burned skin, women in practical dresses that made Evelyn's traveling coat look absurdly delicate. Even the children stopped their games to watch her stand there, lost and obvious. She knew what they saw: a city woman. Soft hands, clean fingernails, a face that hadn't been weathered by sun and wind and brutal winters. "Pray." "That's her," someone muttered. "Bennett's mail-order bride." "Pretty thing. Won't last a month." Evelyn's fingers tightened on her bag. She'd promised herself she wouldn't cry, wouldn't show weakness, wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. She'd cried enough in Chicago. She'd cried when Thomas Whitmore spread his lies, when her employer dismissed her without reference, when her landlady turned her out with 2 days' notice. She'd cried until her eyes were swollen and her throat was raw, and she realized that tears changed nothing. So she stood there in the freezing mud and forced her chin up and tried to look like a woman who belonged somewhere. She failed. "Miss Mercer?" The voice came from her left, low, rough, careful. Evelyn turned and found herself looking at a man who seemed carved from the same hard material as the landscape itself. Cole Bennett was not handsome in the way Chicago men were handsome. There was no polish, no careful grooming, no practiced charm. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and a jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble. His eyes were gray, the color of winter sky, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back. But he didn't stare at her the way the others did. He looked at her like he was trying to see past the fancy coat and the terror she was trying so hard to hide. "Mr. Bennett," Evelyn said, and was grateful her voice didn't shake. He nodded once, picked up her trunk like it weighed nothing. "Wagons this way." That was it. No greeting, no smile, no reassurance that everything would be fine, just an acknowledgement and a direction. Evelyn followed him through the mud, acutely aware of every eye tracking her movement. She heard the whispers, some curious, some amused, some cruel. Heard she ran from some scandal back east. Always something wrong with the ones who answer those ads. Poor Bennett, trading one disaster for another. Evelyn's face burned despite the cold. She wanted to spin around and scream at them that she wasn't broken, wasn't damaged, wasn't whatever they assumed she was. But she'd learned in Chicago that defending yourself only confirmed people's suspicions. So she kept walking, kept her head up, kept following the silent man who'd bought her train ticket and promised her safety in letters that now seemed impossibly optimistic. The wagon was old but sturdy, the kind of vehicle built for function rather than comfort. Cole loaded her trunk into the back with efficient movements, then turned to help her up. His hand was rough and warm when she took it. "It's a 2-hour ride," he said as she settled onto the wooden seat. "Gets colder once we leave town." "I'll manage," Evelyn said, though she was already shivering. Cole studied her for a moment longer, then pulled a heavy wool blanket from behind the seat and handed it to her. "Manage better with this." It smelled like horse and smoke and something else. Something clean and almost comforting. Evelyn wrapped it around her shoulders and tried not to think about how far she was from everything she'd ever known. The wagon lurched forward. Black Ridge began to fall away behind them, And Evelyn realized with a clarity that felt like falling that there was no going back now. No family to return to. Her parents had made their position clear when the scandal broke. No friends willing to risk association with a ruined woman. No money for another train ticket, even if she had somewhere to go. This was it. This frozen, hostile territory with its hard-eyed rancher and its whispered judgments. This was her last chance. "You'll hear things," Cole said suddenly, his eyes on the road ahead. "About why I placed that advertisement." Evelyn waited. "My wife died 3 years ago. Fever. I have a daughter, Sarah. She's 6. His jaw tightened. "Ranch is no place for a child alone. She needs—" He trailed off like he wasn't sure what his daughter needed, only that he couldn't provide it himself. "I'll do my best," Evelyn said quietly. Cole glanced at her then, something unreadable in those gray eyes. "I'm not asking for best. I'm asking for honest effort. That's all." The words should have been reassuring, but somehow they made Evelyn's chest tighter, because honest effort implied there was room for failure, room for disappointment, room for this whole desperate gamble to fall apart. They rode in silence after that. The only sounds the creak of wheels and the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves. The landscape changed as they moved away from town. Wide open spaces broken by distant mountains, bare trees standing like skeletal sentinels, snow covering everything in a white blanket that looked peaceful until you understood how deadly it actually was. Evelyn had never felt so small. In Chicago, she'd been surrounded by buildings and people and noise. Even in her worst moments, there had been the sense that civilization was right there, pressing in from all sides. But here there was nothing, just space and silence, and the terrifying realization that if something went wrong, there was no one to hear you scream. "You're afraid," Cole said. Not a question. Evelyn's first instinct was to deny it, but she was tired of lying, tired of pretending, tired of being the woman everyone expected her to be. "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly, like this was the first honest thing anyone had said to him in years. "Good. Fear keeps you careful. Careful keeps you alive out here." "What happened to your wife?" The question escaped before Evelyn could stop it. "Was she careful?" Cole's hands tightened on the reins. For a long moment, Evelyn thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "She was from Denver, city woman, like you. Thought the frontier would be an adventure." His voice was flat, empty of emotion. "She learned different. By the time she learned, it was too late." Ice formed in Evelyn's stomach. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be smart." He looked at her again, and this time there was something fierce in his gaze. "This land doesn't care about your intentions. It'll kill you for a single mistake. You understand?" "Yes." "I don't think you do." Cole pulled the wagon to a stop on a ridge overlooking a valley. Below them, Evelyn could see a cluster of buildings, a house, a barn, several smaller structures. "That's the ranch. That's where we'll live, where Sarah lives, where you'll work every day from dawn until you can't stand anymore. And it still won't be enough, because there's always more to do, always something breaking or dying or trying to kill you. This isn't Chicago. There's no one to help if things go wrong. There's just you and me and a 6-year-old child in the middle of nowhere." Evelyn stared at the ranch below. It looked impossibly isolated. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. "Because you can still leave." Cole's voice was quiet, but absolute. "I'll take you back to town right now. Put you on the next wagon heading east. You'll lose nothing but time." "I have nowhere to go." "Then you better figure out how to survive here." The words hung between them like a challenge. Evelyn could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to take his offer, to run before she got trapped in this harsh, unforgiving place. But she thought about Chicago, thought about Thomas Whitmore's smirk when he realized his lies had worked. Thought about her former friends crossing the street to avoid her. Thought about the landlady's cold satisfaction when she changed the locks. She thought about being 26 years old and having absolutely nothing. "I'm staying," Evelyn said. Cole studied her face for a long time. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he clicked his tongue and the wagon started moving again. "All right then," he said. "Let's go home." The ranch house was smaller than Evelyn expected, and somehow larger at the same time. 2 stories, rough timber construction, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Smoke rose from the chimney. Light glowed in one window. Someone was inside. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. Evelyn followed, her legs unsteady after the long ride. The cold seemed worse here, sharper, like the wind came straight down from the mountains with nothing to slow it. "Come on," Cole said, heading for the door. The interior was warm, heated by a cast-iron stove that radiated waves of blessed heat. The main room was sparse but clean, a table, chairs, shelves lined with practical items. Everything spoke of function, of efficiency, of a life stripped down to essentials. A woman stood by the stove, stirring something in a pot. She was perhaps 40, with iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that suggested she'd spent her entire life frowning. "Martha," Cole said. "This is Evelyn Mercer." Martha turned and gave Evelyn the kind of look usually reserved for something unpleasant stuck to your shoe. "The bride." "Yes," Evelyn said, trying to smile. Martha snorted. "Well, at least you're here. That's more than the last 3 managed." Evelyn blinked. "Last 3? "Took one look and got back on the wagon," Martha said, returning to her pot. "Can't say I blamed them. This isn't a life for city women with delicate sensibilities." "Martha's the housekeeper," Cole said, ignoring the jab. "She lives in the smaller cabin about a quarter-mile south. Comes daily to help with Sarah and the house." "Where is Sarah?" Evelyn asked. Cole's expression shifted, something soft breaking through the hard exterior. "Upstairs, probably hiding." "Hiding?" "She's shy, and she's—" He paused, searching for words. "She's had a hard time since her mother died. Doesn't trust easy." Martha made a noise that might have been agreement or disgust. It was hard to tell. "I should meet her," Evelyn said. "Give her time," Cole replied. "Let her come to you." But even as he spoke, Evelyn heard a soft creak from above. She looked up and caught a flash of movement, a small figure darting away from the landing. The child had been watching. "Dinner's ready," Martha announced, "though I suppose you'll want to get settled first." "I can eat," Evelyn said quickly. The last thing she wanted was to be alone with her thoughts right now. They ate in near silence. Some kind of stew that was more practical than delicious, bread that was dense and filling, coffee so strong it made Evelyn's eyes water. Martha watched her the entire time with unconcealed skepticism. Cole ate mechanically, like fuel rather than pleasure. And somewhere upstairs, Sarah remained hidden. After dinner, Cole showed Evelyn to a small room on the second floor. It contained a bed, a dresser, a small window that looked out over the dark landscape. "This was my wife's sewing room," he said from the doorway. "Figured it's yours now." Evelyn turned to look at him. "Where do you sleep?" "Down the hall. Sarah's room is between us." His meaning was clear. This was a marriage of convenience, not passion. "Martha leaves at sunset. I'll be up before dawn to start chores. You'll hear me moving around." "What should I do?" "Sleep. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out if you can handle this." He left before she could respond. Evelyn sat on the bed and stared at the bare walls. Through the thin door, she could hear Cole's heavy footsteps, the creak of floorboards, the sound of him moving through this house he'd shared with another woman. She thought about that woman, the city girl from Denver who thought the frontier would be an adventure, who died here, far from everything she knew. Evelyn wondered how long she'd lasted before she realized her mistake. She didn't sleep. The bed was hard, the room was cold despite the bank stove downstairs, and every sound made her jump. Wind rattling the windows, timbers settling, something, an animal, she hoped, scratching at the side of the house. Around 3 a.m, she heard a different sound, crying. Soft, muffled, coming from the room next door. Sarah. Evelyn sat up, listening. The crying continued, not loud, not demanding, but persistent. The sound of a child who'd learned that calling for help didn't bring comfort. She should wait for Cole, she thought. This was his daughter, his responsibility. But the crying didn't stop, and Evelyn couldn't stand it anymore. She slipped out of bed, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and padded down the hall. Sarah's door was slightly ajar. Evelyn pushed it open carefully. The room was small and neat, lit by moonlight through the window. And huddled in the bed was a tiny figure, blankets pulled up to her chin, tears streaming down her face. "Sarah?" Evelyn whispered. The crying stopped instantly. The child stared at her with huge, frightened eyes. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said quickly. "I heard you crying. I wanted to make sure you were all right." Sarah didn't respond, just watched her with that unnerving intensity that children sometimes have. Evelyn took a careful step into the room. "Bad dream?" A tiny nod. "I get those too." Evelyn sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping her distance. "Especially in new places. Everything feels strange and scary." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "Are you my new mama?" The question hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She thought about lying, about making promises she couldn't keep, but looking at this small, scared child, she couldn't do it. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I hope so, but I understand if you're not ready for that yet." Sarah studied her face. "My old mama died." "I know, I'm sorry. Papa said she got sick. He said it wasn't my fault." Sarah's voice dropped even lower. "But I think maybe it was." "Oh, sweetheart, no. I was bad sometimes. I didn't listen. Maybe if I was better, she wouldn't have—" "So stop." Evelyn reached out and took Sarah's small hand. It was cold. "Listen to me. When people get sick, it's not because of anything you did or didn't do. It's not a punishment. It's just something that happens sometimes. Something awful and unfair and terrible, but not your fault. Never your fault." Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "You promise?" "I promise." The child stared at her for a long moment. Then, so quickly that Evelyn barely had time to react, Sarah lunged forward and wrapped her arms around Evelyn's waist. The hug was desperate, fierce, the grip of someone who'd been holding themselves together for far too long. Evelyn held her and felt something crack open in her own chest, something she'd been keeping carefully locked away since Chicago. "It's all right," she whispered, stroking Sarah's hair. "I've got you. You're safe." They stayed like that until Sarah's breathing evened out, and her grip loosened, and she fell back asleep, still holding onto Evelyn's hand. Evelyn sat there in the dark, watching this child who'd lost so much and made a decision. Whatever happened, whatever it took, she would not let this little girl down, even if it killed her. Pamak. Cole found them that way at dawn. Evelyn asleep in the chair beside Sarah's bed, their hands still linked. He stood in the doorway for a long time, just watching. Then he turned and walked away without making a sound. But when Evelyn woke an hour later and made her way downstairs, she found coffee already made, still hot, waiting for her on the stove. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even really a welcome. But it was something. Bartak. The first week was the hardest thing Evelyn had ever done. Martha showed her the morning routine with the air of someone who expected complete failure. Water had to be hauled from the well. The well was 100 yards from the house, and the buckets were heavy, and the ground was frozen, and Evelyn's shoulders screamed by the second trip. The stove needed constant feeding. Breakfast had to be made before Cole came in from the barn. The chickens needed care even though they seemed to actively hate her. And that was just the morning. By noon on the first day, Evelyn's hands were blistered. By evening, every muscle in her body hurt. By bedtime, she barely had the strength to undress before collapsing onto the bed. Martha watched it all with grim satisfaction. "Told Cole this wouldn't work," she muttered on day 3, after Evelyn nearly dropped an entire bucket of milk. City women never last. But Evelyn kept getting up, every morning, before dawn, ignoring the pain and the cold and the voice in her head that said this was impossible. She learned to split kindling without taking off a finger, learned which chickens would tolerate her and which would try to peck her eyes out, learned how to make coffee that didn't taste like dirt and bread that didn't come out as hard as rocks. She failed constantly, burned dinner, let the fire go out, fed the chickens at the wrong time and sent them into an indignant uproar that brought Cole running from the barn, convinced something was attacking them. But she kept trying. And slowly, grudgingly, Martha's expression shifted from contempt to something that might have been respect. "You're stubborn," the older woman said on day 7. "Stupid stubborn." "Thank you," Evelyn replied, too tired to take offense. "Wasn't a compliment." "I'll take it anyway." Martha almost smiled. That. Sarah was easier and harder at the same time. The child followed Evelyn everywhere, silent and watchful. She didn't talk much, but she listened. When Evelyn read to her from the few books in the house, Sarah sat perfectly still, absorbing every word. When Evelyn tried to teach her basic letters, she learned with an intensity that seemed too serious for a 6-year-old. "She's smart," Evelyn told Cole one evening. He nodded. "Like her mother." "She should be in school. Nearest school is 40 miles, and it's not—" He paused. "It's not a good school, mostly just older kids learning enough to work farms." "Then I'll teach her here." Cole looked at her like she'd suggested building a castle. "You're already working from dawn to dusk." "So are you. But Sarah deserves an education. You're not obligated." "I want to." Evelyn met his eyes. "She's a good child, Cole. A brilliant child. She shouldn't waste that just because we're in the middle of nowhere." Something shifted in Cole's expression. He opened his mouth, closed it, then just nodded. "All right, if you think you can manage." "I'll manage." And she did somehow. In the evenings, after dinner, she would sit with Sarah at the table and work through lessons in reading and arithmetic and geography. Martha sometimes stayed to watch, pretending disinterest but clearly listening. One night, Martha brought 2 children with her, neighbors' kids, she explained gruffly. They'd heard Sarah was learning to read and wanted to join. Evelyn looked at the 2 scared, hopeful faces and couldn't say no. So suddenly she was teaching 3 children, then 5, then 8. Word spread fast in a place where news traveled slow. Within 2 weeks, families were riding in from neighboring ranches, bringing their children for evening lessons at the Bennett house. Cole watched this transformation with bemusement. "This wasn't what I advertised for," he said one night, watching Evelyn guide a 10-year-old through basic multiplication. "I know," Evelyn replied. "Is it a problem?" He was quiet for a moment. "No, it's good." Sarah's coming out of her shell. It was true. Sarah had started talking more, smiling more, seeming less like a ghost haunting her own life. "She just needed to feel less alone," Evelyn said. Cole looked at her then with something unreadable in his expression. "Yeah, maybe we all did." But Black Ridge hadn't forgotten about Evelyn. She had to go into town for supplies on week 3. Cole offered to come, but there was work on the ranch that couldn't wait, so Martha accompanied her instead. The stares started the moment they arrived. Evelyn had hoped that 3 weeks of absence might have softened people's interest. Instead, it seemed to have sharpened it. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Men watched her with calculating expressions. And at the general store, she ran into Silas Crow for the first time. He was a big man, not tall but broad, with expensive clothes that seemed absurd in this rough town, and eyes that assessed her like livestock. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, blocking her path to the counter. "Or should I call you Miss Mercer still? I understand the marriage hasn't been formalized." Evelyn's spine stiffened. "Mrs. Bennett is fine, of course." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Silas Crow. I own most of the land between here and the next county. Cole and I are business associates." "Competitors," Martha muttered behind her. Silas's smile sharpened. "Merely competitors in the free market, Martha. Nothing personal." "Everything's personal with you," Martha shot back. Silas ignored her, keeping his attention on Evelyn. "I heard you're running some kind of school out at the Bennett Ranch." "I'm teaching a few children to read." "How charitable." Though I wonder if Cole knows the kind of attention that brings. People might start asking questions about his new wife, about where she came from, about what she's running from. The threat was barely veiled. Evelyn felt her face burn, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not running from anything." "No?" Silas's eyebrows rose. "That's not what I heard. I have business contacts in Chicago, you see. And they tell the most interesting stories about a young woman who caused quite a scandal, something about a broken engagement and some very serious accusations." "Those accusations were lies," Evelyn said quietly. "Were they?" Silas leaned closer. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you fled east with your reputation in tatters and convinced some lonely rancher to take you in. Makes a person wonder what else you might be lying about." "That's enough," Martha snapped, stepping between them. "Evelyn's business is her own, and Cole's, not yours. Cole is my concern when his decisions affect the community. We're a close-knit town, Martha. We protect our own. And sometimes that means protecting them from outsiders who bring trouble." He tipped his hat to Evelyn, his smile cold. Welcome to Black Ridge, Mrs. Bennett. I hope you enjoy your stay, however long it lasts. He walked away, leaving Evelyn shaking with anger and humiliation. Don't listen to him, Martha said firmly, taking her arm. Silas is a snake, always has been. He knows about Chicago. So what? Everyone here is running from something. Cole knows that. I know that. Anyone with half a brain knows that. Martha's grip tightened. But Silas is dangerous, girl. He likes control, likes knowing everyone's secrets so he can use them. You teaching those children? That threatens him because it means people are starting to see value in the Bennett Ranch beyond cattle and land. I don't understand. You will, Martha said grimly. Just watch your back. They finished their shopping in silence and drove home through the cold afternoon. When they arrived, Cole was waiting on the porch. One look at Evelyn's face told him something was wrong. What happened? Silas Crow, Martha said shortly. Cole's jaw tightened. What did he do? Nothing specific, just threats dressed up as politeness. Evelyn forced herself to meet Cole's eyes. He knows about Chicago, about the scandal. I figured he would eventually. Man has contacts everywhere. Cole's voice was flat, dangerous. What did he say? Evelyn told him. All of it. She was tired of hiding, tired of pretending the past wasn't following her like a shadow. When she finished, Cole was quiet for a long time. Then he said, You want to tell me the truth about Chicago? It wasn't a demand, just a question. Evelyn took a breath. Thomas Whitmore was the son of a prominent banker. We were engaged for 6 months. I thought I knew him. I thought... She shook her head. Then I saw him beat a servant for breaking a dish. Not push, not shove, beat. Badly enough that the man couldn't work for a week. And when I tried to stop it, Thomas told me that's how discipline works, that I'd better learn that before we married. Cole's expression darkened. I broke the engagement the next day, Evelyn continued, and Thomas was furious. He spread rumors, told everyone I'd been unfaithful, that I'd tried to trap him into marriage for his money, that I was unstable and dangerous. Within a month, I'd lost my teaching position, my housing, and every friend I thought I had. His father's bank controlled half the businesses in Chicago. No one would hire me. No one would even speak to me. So you came here, Cole said quietly. So I came here because I had nowhere else to go. Evelyn met his eyes. If that changes things, it doesn't. Cole, it doesn't, he repeated more firmly. I don't care what you did or didn't do in Chicago. I care what you do here. And here, you've been working harder than most men I know. You've been good to my daughter. You've brought something to this ranch that's been missing for years. He paused. That's enough for me. Evelyn felt something loosen in her chest, something she hadn't realized was clenched tight. Thank you, she whispered. Cole nodded once. Then he looked at Martha. Silas is making a move. Looks like it. Then we better be ready. Inside the house, Sarah was waiting with a book, eager for her evening lesson. And as Evelyn sat down with the child, listening to her sound out words with growing confidence, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. But outside, the wind was picking up. And in Black Ridge, Silas Crow was making plans that would change everything. The first real snow came 2 weeks later. Not the dusting they'd had before, but a real Montana blizzard that turned the world white and made the ranch house feel like a ship adrift in a frozen ocean. The wind howled like something alive and angry, rattling windows and finding every crack in the walls. Evelyn woke before dawn to find ice on the inside of her window. Downstairs, Cole was already dressed and heading for the door, wrapped in layers of wool and leather. Where are you going? Evelyn asked, still half asleep. Cattle need checking. Storm like this, they'll bunch up and freeze if we don't keep them moving. Can't it wait until the storm passes? Cole pulled on his gloves, his expression grim. Storm like this doesn't pass for days. Cattle can't wait that long. Then I'm coming with you. He turned to look at her, really look at her, like he was trying to determine if she was serious or insane. No. Yes. Evelyn, you need help. Martha can watch Sarah. I'm coming. You'll freeze. Then I'll freeze. She crossed her arms. But I'm not staying here while you risk yourself alone. Something flickered in Cole's eyes, surprise, maybe, or the beginning of respect. You don't know what you're asking for? Then teach me. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Cole sighed and pulled extra gear from the hooks by the door. Put these on. Everything. And if I tell you to do something, you do it immediately. No questions, no hesitation. Understood? Understood. The cold outside was worse than anything Evelyn had experienced. It wasn't just cold, it was aggressive, hostile, the kind of temperature that made your lungs ache and your skin burn. The wind cut through her layers like they weren't there. Cole handed her the reins of a horse. Stay close. Don't try to be a hero. If you get separated, stay put and wait for me to find you. They rode out into the white chaos together. Visibility was maybe 20 feet on a good moment, less when the wind kicked up. Snow came at them horizontally, stinging any exposed skin. The cattle were dark shapes in the whiteness, huddled together against the cold. Cole worked systematically, using his horse to push the animals into movement, keeping them from bunching too tight, checking for injuries or signs of freezing. Evelyn tried to follow his lead, but her horse sensed her inexperience and resisted her commands. More than once she nearly lost her seat. Her hands were numb inside her gloves. Her face felt like it might crack. But she kept going. Hours blurred together, the world became nothing but white and cold, and the endless task of keeping cattle alive. Evelyn's thoughts narrowed to simple things. Stay on the horse, follow Cole, don't fall, don't stop moving. At some point, she lost feeling in her feet entirely. When they finally turned back toward the ranch, Evelyn was shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins. Cole had to help her down from the horse, and her legs nearly gave out when she tried to stand. Inside, he said, his voice rough. Now! The warmth of the house felt like pain. Evelyn's hands and feet burned as circulation returned. She stood by the stove, shaking, unable to form words. Martha took one look at her and swore. You took her out in that? She insisted, Cole said. She's half frozen. She's also still breathing. That's better than I expected. Martha made a disgusted noise and started heating water for tea. Sarah appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with concern. Is Miss Evelyn sick? Just cold, sweetheart, Evelyn managed through chattering teeth. I'll be fine. But she wasn't fine. That night, fever took hold. Her body had pushed too hard, gotten too cold, and now it was demanding payment. She spent 3 days in bed, drifting in and out of consciousness, while Martha forced broth down her throat and muttered about foolish city women who didn't know their limits. Cole came to check on her twice a day. He didn't say much, just stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure if he should apologize or be angry. On the 4th day, Evelyn woke with a clear head for the first time. Sarah was sitting beside the bed, reading haltingly from a book. What are you reading? Evelyn asked, her voice rough. Sarah jumped, then smiled with relief. You're awake. I was reading the story you showed me, about the explorer. That's good. You're getting better at the big words. Sarah's smile faded. Are you going to die like Mama? The question was so direct, so raw, that Evelyn's chest tightened. No, sweetheart. I just got too cold. I'm already feeling better. Mama said she was feeling better too. Then she died. Evelyn pulled herself up in bed, ignoring the wave of dizziness. Sarah, come here. The child climbed onto the bed carefully, like Evelyn might break. I'm not going anywhere, Evelyn said firmly. I promise you, it takes more than a little snow to get rid of me. Sarah stared at her with those two serious eyes. Papa says you're stubborn. He's right. He says Mama wasn't stubborn enough. He says that's why... Sarah trailed off, biting her lip. Your Mama was brave and kind, Evelyn said gently. Sometimes being brave means knowing when to rest. I'm learning that, but I'm not leaving you. All right? Sarah nodded slowly. Then, in a smaller voice, the other kids miss you, the lessons. Tell them I'll be back soon. We have a lot more to learn. That night, Cole brought her dinner himself instead of sending Martha. You scared the hell out of us, he said, setting the tray on the bedside table. I scared myself. You could have died. But I didn't. Evelyn met his eyes. And I'd do it again. Cole sat down heavily in the chair Martha had been using. He looked exhausted. 3 days of running the ranch alone while worrying about her, she realized. Why? He asked. Why push yourself like that? Because this is my home now. These are my responsibilities. I'm not going to be the woman who hides inside while everyone else does the hard work. That's not... Cole stopped, rubbed his face. My wife used to say things like that. In the beginning, she wanted to help, wanted to prove herself. I let her because I thought, he shook his head. I should have protected her better, should have made her stay inside where it was safe. Cole, you can't protect people from everything. I can try. His voice was rough with old guilt. And I failed once already. I'm not doing that again. Evelyn reached out and took his hand. It was rough and calloused, warm against her still cold fingers. I'm not your wife. I'm not her replacement. I'm just me. And me is stubborn and reckless and apparently terrible at knowing when to quit. Yeah. Cole's mouth twitched. I noticed. But I'm also not going anywhere. So you either teach me how to survive out here, or you spend all winter worrying about me doing something stupid. Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then he squeezed her hand once and stood. Rest. When you're stronger, I'll teach you properly. How to read weather, how to handle a horse in snow, how to know your limits before you cross them. Deal. At the door, he paused. Evelyn, thank you for helping with the cattle, for not giving up. Thank you for not sending me back to town. The thought crossed my mind, but he was almost smiling when he said it. After he left, Evelyn lay in the dark and listened to the house settle around her. Outside, the storm had finally passed. Tomorrow there would be work, endless work, brutal work. There would be more cold, more struggle, more moments when she questioned every choice that brought her here. But tonight, she felt like maybe she was starting to belong, just a little. By the end of the month, 17 children were coming to the ranch for lessons. It had become a routine. Parents would drop them off in the late afternoon after their own work was done. The children would crowd into the main room, sitting on benches Cole and Martha had built, and Evelyn would teach until the sun went down. Reading, writing, arithmetic, geography. She used whatever materials she could find, old newspapers, catalogs, pages torn from the few books in the house. The children absorbed it all with an intensity that sometimes took her breath away. These were kids who'd never had a chance at real education, and they knew it. Sarah blossomed in the midst of it. She helped the younger children with their letters and beamed with pride when Evelyn praised her work. The scared, quiet girl was transforming into something brighter, but the school's success didn't go unnoticed. Silas Crow made his displeasure clear through small acts of sabotage. Supplies Evelyn ordered from town would be delayed or lost. Parents would receive visits from Silas's men, asking pointed questions about why they were sending their children to learn from a woman with a questionable past. Some families stopped coming, scared of making an enemy of the most powerful man in the territory. But most kept coming. Silas doesn't like losing control, Martha explained one evening after a particularly difficult day. 3 families had pulled their children out, citing various excuses that all smelled like Silas's influence. What does he want? Evelyn asked, frustrated. What he's always wanted. Everything. Martha poured coffee with sharp, angry movements. He owns most of the land around here, controls the trade routes, has the sheriff in his pocket. But people are starting to realize they don't need him for everything. Your school's showing them that. It's just reading lessons. It's power, Cole said from the doorway. Neither woman had heard him come in. Knowledge is power. Silas knows that. Right now, most folks in Black Ridge can barely read. They depend on him to handle contracts, interpret law, manage their business. But if their kids grow up educated? He shook his head. That threatens everything he's built. So what do we do? Evelyn asked. We keep going, Cole said simply. We don't let him scare us into quitting. He could make things very difficult. He's already making things difficult, but backing down just proves he was right to push. Cole moved to the stove, poured his own coffee. Besides, you've got more allies than you think. People respect what you're doing. They're just scared to show it publicly. That's not very comforting. It's honest. Cole looked at her directly. You asked what you're up against. That's what you're up against. A man with money and influence and no moral compass. If you want to quit, I'll understand. But if you want to fight, I'm with you. Evelyn thought about Chicago, about Thomas Whitmore and how he'd destroyed her reputation with lies and money, about how she'd run instead of fighting back because she thought she had no choice. I'm not quitting, she said. Martha smiled grimly. Good, I was hoping you'd say that. I haven't had a decent fight in years. The confrontation came 2 weeks later. Evelyn was in town for supplies. Cole had insisted on coming this time, sensing trouble. They just loaded the wagon when Silas appeared with 3 of his men. "Bennett," Silas said pleasantly, "and the lovely Mrs. Bennett. What a surprise!" "Silas," Cole replied flatly, "I've been meaning to speak with you about your little school project. Not a project, just lessons for kids who want to learn." Of course, of course." Silas's smile was cold. "But you see, there's a problem. Several parents have expressed concerns about the quality of education their children are receiving, about the qualifications of the teacher." "What qualifications?" Evelyn asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I taught in Chicago for 3 years before you were dismissed for improper conduct." Silas pulled a paper from his coat. "I have the documentation right here. Letter from your former employer detailing the scandal, the accusations, the reasons for your termination." Evelyn's blood went cold. Thomas's reach extended even here, into this frozen nowhere. "Those accusations were lies," she said. "Were they?" "Because this letter is quite specific about your behavior, about your attempts to manipulate a prominent family, about your unstable temperament." Silas's voice was smooth, reasonable. "I'm sure you understand why parents might be concerned about exposing their children to such an influence." "You bastard," Cole said quietly. "I'm simply looking out for the community's well-being." Silas folded the letter carefully. "Of course, if Mrs. Bennett were to discontinue her teaching activities, I'm sure this information wouldn't need to be widely shared. We could all move forward peacefully." "You're blackmailing her," Cole said. "I'm offering a solution." Silas looked at Evelyn. "You're new here, Mrs. Bennett. You don't understand how things work. Blackridge takes care of its own, but it's wary of outsiders who bring trouble. You've already brought scandal. Do you really want to add more?" Evelyn's hands were shaking. All those children's faces flashed through her mind. Sarah, who was finally coming out of her shell. Michael, who'd learned to read his own name last week. Little Emma, who cried when her parents said she might have to stop coming. She thought about running again, about how easy it would be to just give up, let Silas win, keep her head down. Then she thought about Thomas Whitmore's smirk, about every person who'd believed his lies instead of listening to her truth. "No," she said. Silas blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Evelyn stepped forward and was proud that her voice didn't shake. "You can spread whatever lies you want, Mr. Crow. You can show that letter to everyone in town. You can try your hardest to destroy my reputation here like Thomas Whitmore destroyed it in Chicago. But I'm not stopping those lessons, because those children deserve better than men like you telling them what they're allowed to learn." Silas's pleasant expression vanished. "You're making a mistake. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." "Cole, surely you can control your wife." "She's not a horse to be controlled," Cole interrupted. "And if you think threatening her is going to work, you don't know her at all." He moved to stand beside Evelyn, his presence solid and supporting. "We're done here." "You'll regret this," Silas said, his voice hard now. "Both of you." "Add it to the list," Cole replied. They left Silas standing in the street and drove away in tense silence. Halfway home, Evelyn started crying. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears that she couldn't hold back anymore. All the fear and anger and frustration she'd been containing finally broke through. Cole pulled the wagon to a stop. "I'm sorry," Evelyn managed. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "Don't apologize." Cole's voice was rough. "You stood up to him. That takes guts. He's going to ruin everything. He's going to try." Cole handed her a handkerchief. "But he doesn't get to win just because he threatens us. That's not how this works." "How does it work then?" "We survive. We outlast him. We keep doing what's right until enough people stand with us that he can't touch us anymore." Cole paused. "It won't be easy. It might get worse before it gets better. But we don't give up. That's the only rule that matters out here." Evelyn wiped her eyes, feeling foolish and raw and somehow stronger at the same time. "You really think we can win?" "I think we can survive. That's enough for now." They rode the rest of the way in silence, but when they reached the ranch, Cole helped her down from the wagon and held onto her hand for just a moment longer than necessary. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "I'm glad you're here, even with all the trouble." "Yeah?" Yeah. He released her hand and turned away, but not before she saw the hint of a smile. Even if you are stubborn as hell. Inside, Sarah was waiting with her homework completed and questions about tomorrow's lesson. Martha had dinner ready and fresh coffee brewing. Outside, the Montana winter pressed against the windows, dark and unforgiving. But inside, there was warmth and purpose, and the beginning of something that felt like family. Silas made good on his threats. Within a week, everyone in Black Ridge knew about Evelyn's scandal. The letter was mysteriously shared at the general store, the saloon, the church. People whispered and stared and judged. Several more families pulled their children from lessons. Storekeepers who'd been cordial became cold. But some people didn't pull back. Michael's father, a tough rancher named Jack Harrison, rode out to the ranch specifically to tell Evelyn he didn't care about Chicago. My boy's learning to read for the first time in his life. That matters more than old gossip. Emma's mother brought cookies and told Evelyn that any woman Silas Crow hated was probably doing something right. And slowly, quietly, others began to speak up. Not loudly, no one wanted to make themselves a target, but in small ways they showed their support. The school continued, smaller now, but determined. The remaining children studied harder, as if to prove something to the town that had judged their teacher. Sarah became fiercely protective of Evelyn. When she heard other children repeating rumors their parents had shared, she stood up and defended her with a passion that made Evelyn's throat tight. "Miss Evelyn is good," Sarah insisted to a group of skeptical kids one afternoon. "She's the best person I know, and if you don't like her, you can leave." Cole heard about it later from one of the parents, and told Evelyn with something close to pride in his voice. "Guess she takes after you," he said. "Stubborn." "I prefer determined," Evelyn replied. Same thing in different words. But the pressure continued. Silas's men started riding past the ranch more frequently, just to be seen. Supplies were still mysteriously delayed. One of Cole's fences was cut, letting cattle wander. Small things, nothing provable, but constant. Cole started sleeping lighter. Martha brought her rifle when she came to the ranch. Even Sarah seemed more watchful, less carefree than she'd been. "How long can we keep this up?" Evelyn asked Martha one evening after a particularly tense day. "As long as it takes." Martha was grinding coffee beans with more force than necessary. "Silas is counting on us to get tired, to give up. The moment we do, he wins, so we don't give up." "What if he does something worse than cutting fences?" Martha met her eyes. "Then we deal with worse, but we don't quit." The old woman's certainty was both comforting and terrifying, because it meant they were in this now, really in it, with no easy way out. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She got up and found Cole on the porch, staring out at the dark landscape. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Something feels wrong," Cole said quietly. "Weather's changing, storm coming, a bad one." Evelyn looked at the sky. It seemed clear, stars visible. "How can you tell?" "The air, the way the animals are acting. You learn to read it after a while." He glanced at her. "We need to be ready. This one's going to be worse than what we've had." "How much worse?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "The kind that kills people if they're not careful. The kind that makes you remember why they call this the frontier." Inside, Sarah cried out in her sleep. Evelyn started to go to her, but Cole stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Let her work through it. She needs to learn to be tough. She's 6 years old. She's a frontier 6. Cole's voice was gentle but firm. "Out here, we grow up fast or we don't grow up at all." Evelyn wanted to argue, to say that children deserve to be protected, to be soft. But looking at Cole's weathered face, at the lines carved by loss and hardship, she understood what he was trying to say. Safety was an illusion in a place like this. The only real protection was strength. Sarah's crying stopped. Through the window, they could see her settling back into sleep on her own. "She's getting stronger," Cole observed. "Because of you." "I'm not doing anything special. You're showing up. Every day, no matter what. That's special enough." Cole turned to look at her directly. "I never told you this, but when I placed that advertisement, I didn't expect anyone to respond. Or if they did, I expected someone desperate enough to overlook how hard this life is. Someone who'd pretend for a while, then break. And instead you got me. Instead, I got someone who rides into blizzards and tells Silas Crow to go to hell and teaches children in her spare time. His mouth quirked. You're either the bravest person I've met or the craziest. Can I be both? Yeah. Cole smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually stern face. I guess you can. They stood together in the cold dark, and Evelyn felt something shift between them. Not romance, not exactly, but partnership, understanding, the recognition that they were building something together, something worth protecting. The storm, she said, when it comes, I want to help. Evelyn, I know my limits better now. I know what I'm capable of, and I know you can't handle everything alone. She met his eyes. We're in this together. That's what you said. So let me be in it with you. Cole studied her face for a long time. Then he nodded slowly. All right, but you follow my lead. Every instruction immediately. No heroics. No heroics, she agreed. The storm arrived 3 days later. It came with a violence that made the previous blizzards look gentle. Wind that screamed like wounded animals. Snow so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Temperatures that dropped so fast the water in buckets froze solid in minutes. Cole had been preparing for days, moving cattle closer to shelter, securing buildings, stockpiling supplies. But preparation could only do so much against a storm like this. The first night, they huddled in the ranch house and listened to the wind tear at the world outside. Sarah clung to Evelyn, frightened by the noise. Martha sat by the stove with her rifle across her lap, like she could shoot the weather if it got too close. By morning, the barn door had been ripped off its hinges. 3 cattle were missing, and the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. Cole and Evelyn went out into hell itself. The cold was beyond description. It didn't just chill, it attacked, finding every gap in your clothing, stealing heat from your body faster than you could generate it. The wind was so strong it knocked Evelyn sideways more than once. Visibility was essentially zero. They tied a rope between themselves so they wouldn't get separated. Even then, Evelyn sometimes lost sight of Cole completely in the whiteout. Finding the missing cattle took hours. One was already dead, frozen solid. The other 2 were in bad shape, but savable. They pushed and dragged the animals back toward shelter, fighting the wind every step. At some point, Evelyn stopped feeling her feet entirely. Her face was numb. Her hands barely worked, but she kept moving because stopping meant dying. When they finally made it back to the barn, Cole had to physically lift her off her horse. Her legs wouldn't hold her weight. Inside, he said, his voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around his face. Now! Martha met them at the door. One look at Evelyn and she started swearing. Foolish, foolish girl. You're half dead. Better than fully dead, Evelyn managed, teeth chattering. They stripped her out of her frozen outer layers and wrapped her in blankets by the stove. Sarah brought hot coffee that Evelyn could barely hold. Her hand shook so badly that half the liquid spilled. How many did we lose? Martha asked Cole. 1 confirmed. 3 more iffy. We'll know by morning. Storm's not done yet. I know. Cole pulled off his gloves, revealing hands that were red and raw. It'll get worse before it gets better. He was right. The storm raged for 3 more days. They took turns going out to check the animals, to break ice on water sources, to repair damage that seemed to reappear as fast as they could fix it. It was endless, brutal work that left them all exhausted and strained. On the 4th night, something changed. Cole woke Evelyn at 2 a.m, his expression grim. Something's wrong with the south fence. Animals are restless. They went out together into the howling dark. The fence was down, not just damaged, but deliberately cut. The marks were clean, unmistakable. Sabotage, Cole said, his voice tight with anger. Someone did this during the storm. Silas, Evelyn breathed. Has to be. No one else would be insane enough to come out in this. Cole started working to repair the fence, moving fast. We need to get this fixed before the cattle scatter. They worked side by side, fingers fumbling with frozen wire, fighting the wind and snow. It took an hour to secure the fence enough that it would hold. As they finished, Evelyn spotted something in the distance. A light, moving through the storm. Then another. Figures on horseback, barely visible. Cole, she said urgently. He saw them too. Back to the house. Now. They ran through the snow, the mysterious riders following at a distance. Made it inside and barred the door. "Who were they?" Sarah asked, frightened. "I don't know." Cole checked his rifle. "But we're not taking chances." They waited in the dark, watching the windows. The light circled the property once, then disappeared into the storm. "They were checking to see if the sabotage worked," Martha said grimly, "seeing if the cattle scattered. And when they see the fences fixed, they'll know we're watching," Cole finished. "Silas will escalate." Evelyn felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. "What do we do?" "We survive tonight. Then we make a plan." Cole's jaw was set. Because this just became war. The storm finally broke on the 7th day. The sudden silence was almost louder than the wind had been. They emerged from the ranch house to find a transformed landscape. Snowdrifts 8 feet high, ice coating everything, a world scrubbed clean and deadly. And carved into the snow near the barn, where they couldn't miss it, was a message: leave. Simple, direct, threatening. Sarah saw it and started crying. Martha cursed loud enough to scare the chickens. Cole stood staring at it with an expression that made Evelyn nervous. "This is my fault," Evelyn said quietly. "If I hadn't pushed back against Silas, if I just quit the school—" "Don't!" Cole's voice was sharp. "Don't you dare blame yourself for a bully's actions. This is on Silas, not you." "But no." He turned to look at her. "You did nothing wrong. You taught children. You stood up for yourself. Those aren't crimes. Silas is the one terrorizing people, cutting fences, making threats, and he's going to answer for it." "How?" Evelyn gestured at the message. "He owns this town. The sheriff works for him. Who's going to stop him?" "We are," Martha said firmly, "because enough is enough." Cole nodded. "Martha's right. We've been playing defense. Time to change that." "What are you suggesting?" Evelyn asked. "I'm suggesting we stop hiding. Stop trying to outlast him quietly." Cole's expression was determined. "We make what he did public. Show people the cut fence, the threatening message. Make it impossible for him to pretend he's just a concerned citizen." "That's dangerous," Martha warned. "Everything's dangerous now." Cole looked between them. "But I'm tired of letting him control our lives through fear. We fight back, or we spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders." Evelyn thought about it, about the children who'd stopped coming to lessons, about the families too scared to stand against Silas, about living in constant threat. "I'm in," she said. "Me too," Martha added. "About time someone stood up to that snake." Sarah, who'd been listening from the doorway, spoke up in a small but determined voice. "I want to help too." Cole shook his head. "Sarah, I'm not a baby papa. Miss Evelyn said we don't run from fights we didn't start. This is our fight." Cole closed his eyes briefly, and Evelyn saw the weight of fatherhood on him, wanting to protect his daughter, but also wanting her to be strong. "All right," he said finally, "but you stay safe. You do exactly what we tell you. Understood?" "Understood," Sarah said, standing straighter. They spent the rest of the day documenting everything: the cut fence, the message in the snow, the evidence of sabotage. Cole rode to 3 neighboring ranches and brought back witnesses who'd seen Silas's men riding during the storm. Slowly, quietly, they built a case. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table planning their next move, Evelyn realized something had changed. They weren't separate anymore. Cole with his grief, Evelyn with her shame, Martha with her bitterness, Sarah with her fear. They were a unit now, a family forged by hardship and choice. "Tomorrow we go to town," Cole announced. "We show everyone what Silas did, and we let the people decide if they're going to keep letting him control them through fear." "He won't take it well," Martha said. "I know." Cole's expression was grim. "So we better be ready for whatever he throws at us." That night, Evelyn lay awake and listened to the house settle. Outside, the world was frozen and hostile. Inside, they were preparing for a fight that could destroy everything they'd built. But for the first time since leaving Chicago, Evelyn didn't feel like running. She felt like standing her ground. Whatever came next, they would face it together. They rode into Black Ridge at noon, when the sun was at its highest and the main street would be most crowded. Cole drove the wagon with Evelyn beside him. Martha and Sarah sat in the back, both wrapped in blankets against the lingering cold. Behind them rode Jack Harrison and 2 other ranchers who'd agreed to witness. their presence a silent declaration that not everyone in the territory feared Silas Crow. The town noticed them immediately. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People stepped out of buildings to watch. By the time Cole pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store, half of Black Ridge had gathered to see what was happening. Silas appeared within minutes, flanked by 3 of his men. His expression was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. "Bennett," he called out, loud enough for everyone to hear, "what brings you to town with such an escort?" Cole climbed down from the wagon slowly, deliberately. "Came to show people something." "Oh?" Silas's smile widened. "And what would that be?" Cole pulled back the canvas covering the wagon bed. Inside lay the cut fence wire, carefully coiled and marked. The wooden sign with "Leave" carved into it. Photographs Jack Harrison had helped them take of the damage. "Evidence," Cole said flatly, "of someone sabotaging my ranch during the storm, cutting fences, making threats." The crowd pressed closer, murmuring. Silas's smile didn't falter. "That's terrible," he said smoothly. "Do you know who did it?" "I have a pretty good idea," Cole's voice carried across the street. "Your men were seen riding during the storm, near my property, right around the time the fence was cut." "My men?" Silas laughed. "Cole, you can't be serious. Why would my men risk their lives in that storm to damage your fence?" "Because you wanted to drive us out," Evelyn said, climbing down from the wagon. She was shaking, but her voice was steady. "Because I wouldn't stop teaching. Because we wouldn't be intimidated." Silas turned his attention to her, and the look in his eyes made her want to step back. But she held her ground. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, his tone dripping with false sympathy, "I understand you've been through a difficult time. The scandal in Chicago, the adjustment to frontier life, the stress of trying to fit in where you're not wanted. But making wild accusations won't help your situation." "I'm not making accusations," Evelyn replied. "I'm stating facts. Your men cut our fence. They left threatening messages. They've been harassing us for weeks because you don't like that I'm teaching children to read." "Teaching them? Or filling their heads with ideas above their station?" Silas's pleasant mask was slipping. "You're an outsider with a ruined reputation trying to influence impressionable children. Of course people are concerned." "The only person concerned is you," Jack Harrison spoke up from his horse. "Because you can't control educated people the way you control ignorant ones." Several people in the crowd nodded. Others looked uncomfortable but didn't disagree. Silas's jaw tightened. "This is absurd. I've done nothing but try to protect this community from—" "From what?" Martha interrupted, climbing down from the wagon with surprising agility for a woman her age. "From a woman teaching children their letters? From a family trying to make an honest living? Or from anyone who doesn't bow down to you?" The crowd was shifting now. Evelyn could feel it, the way people were looking at Silas with new skepticism, the way they glanced at each other with raised eyebrows. "I don't have to listen to this," Silas said, his voice hard now. "You have no proof of anything, just speculation and paranoia." "We have witnesses," Cole said. "People who saw your men riding during the storm. People who've been harassed by you for supporting the school. People who are tired of living under your thumb." "Then let them speak," Silas challenged, looking around the crowd. "Let's hear from all these brave souls who are willing to testify against me." Silence. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, but no one stepped forward. Evelyn's heart sank. They were all here, watching, probably agreeing privately, but none of them would speak publicly. The fear ran too deep. "That's what I thought," Silas said, satisfaction creeping into his voice. "A lot of accusations, but no one willing to back them up. Because they're lies, spread by desperate people trying to—" "I'll testify." The voice came from the back of the crowd. A woman pushed through, Emma's mother, the one who'd brought cookies to support Evelyn weeks ago. Her face was pale but determined. "I'll testify that your foreman threatened my husband, said we'd lose our supplier contracts if Emma kept attending lessons at the Bennett Ranch." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Mrs. Crawford, I think you're confused." "I'm not confused." Mrs. Crawford's voice shook, but she didn't back down. "And I'm tired of being scared." "I'll testify too," said a man Evelyn recognized as the town blacksmith. "Your men told me I'd lose business if I made shoes for Bennett's horses. Said you'd make sure no one in town used my forge." One by one, people started speaking up. Small testimonies, minor incidents, but they added up to a pattern. Threats, intimidation, manipulation. The picture of a man who controlled the town through fear. Silas's expression darkened with each new voice. "You're all making a mistake," he said, his pleasant tone completely gone now. "A serious mistake." "The only mistake," Cole said quietly, "was thinking you could keep doing this forever." Silas took a step forward, his hand moving toward his gun. His men tensed, ready to follow his lead. The crowd gasped and pulled back. For a moment, violence hung in the air like a physical presence. Then the sheriff pushed through the crowd. Sheriff Tom Wade was an older man, weathered and tired-looking. Everyone knew he was in Silas's pocket, had been for years. Evelyn's stomach dropped when she saw him approach. "That's enough," Wade said, his voice carrying authority despite his slight build. "Silas, step back." Silas looked at him with surprise. "Tom, you can't seriously be I said step back." Wade's hand rested on his own gun. "I've been hearing complaints for weeks now. Turned a blind eye because, well, you know why. But threatening women and children? Cutting fences during a killer storm?" He shook his head. "That crosses a line even I won't ignore." "You work for me," Silas hissed. "I work for this town," Wade replied. "And right now this town needs you to answer some questions, so you're coming with me." Silas's face went red. "You can't arrest me on the basis of hearsay, and I can hold you for questioning, and I can investigate the allegations. If you're innocent like you claim, you've got nothing to worry about." Wade's expression was grim. "But if I find out you endangered people's lives during that storm, there's going to be consequences." For a long moment, Silas just stared at the sheriff. Then he looked around at the crowd, at all the faces that had once shown him respect or fear, and now showed something closer to disgust. "This isn't over," he said quietly, looking directly at Evelyn. "Not by a long shot." "Yeah, it is," Cole replied. "You just don't know it yet." Wade took Silas by the arm and led him toward the sheriff's office. His men followed reluctantly, unsure what to do without their boss giving orders. The crowd erupted in conversation the moment they were gone. People pressed close to Cole and Evelyn, some thanking them, some asking questions, some just wanting to be part of the moment. Mrs. Crawford hugged Evelyn tightly. "I've been wanting to do that for years," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me the courage." "You gave yourself the courage," Evelyn replied. "You just needed a reason to use it." Jack Harrison dismounted and shook Cole's hand. "Hell of a thing," he said with a grin. "Didn't think Wade had it in him to stand up to Silas." "Neither did I," Cole admitted. "But I guess everyone has a breaking point." They spent another hour in town, answering questions and accepting congratulations from people who suddenly remembered they'd never really liked Silas anyway. Evelyn knew it was partially performative, people claiming bravery after the danger had passed. But she also knew that breaking Silas's hold on the town required exactly this kind of public moment, a crack in the facade that people could point to and say, "That's when things changed." By the time they loaded back into the wagon, Sarah was exhausted but beaming. "We won," she said simply. "We won a battle," Cole corrected gently. "War might not be over yet." But even he seemed more relaxed on the ride home, like a weight had lifted from his shoulders. Martha was less optimistic. "Silas won't take this lying down," she warned. "Man like that, humiliated in public? He'll come back harder." "Let him try," Evelyn said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "We're not running anymore." That night, they celebrated with a dinner that was slightly nicer than usual. Martha had saved some preserved fruit, and she made a pie that was almost good. Sarah laughed more than Evelyn had ever heard. Even Cole smiled, really smiled, until the tension lines around his eyes softened. Later, after Sarah was asleep and Martha had gone to her cabin, Evelyn and Cole sat on the porch together. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like someone had thrown diamonds at black velvet. "Thank you," Cole said quietly. "For what?" "For not running. For standing up. For being—" He paused, searching for words. "For being exactly who you are." Evelyn felt warmth spread through her chest. "I didn't do anything special." "You did everything special." Cole turned to look at her. "My wife, my first wife, she was kind and gentle and good. But she wasn't strong, not in the way this place demands. I thought that was what I needed when I placed that advertisement. Someone gentle to balance out the harshness. But I was wrong. Cole, I needed someone strong enough to survive the harshness. Someone who could stand beside me instead of behind me. He reached out and took her hand. I needed you. The touch was warm and rough and real. Evelyn squeezed his hand gently. I needed this too, she admitted. I didn't know it, but I needed a place where I could be strong instead of proper, where I could fight instead of hiding. She looked at him. I needed to stop being the woman Chicago wanted me to be and figure out who I actually am. And who are you? Evelyn thought about it. About the woman who'd stepped off that freight wagon months ago, terrified and broken. About the woman who'd ridden into blizzards and faced down bullies and refused to quit even when everything told her to. I'm someone who doesn't give up anymore, she said finally. That's all I know for sure. Cole smiled, and in the starlight he looked younger, less burdened. That's enough. They sat together in comfortable silence until the cold drove them inside. And when Evelyn climbed the stairs to her small room, she realized she'd stopped thinking of it as temporary. Somewhere along the way, this harsh place had become home. The next morning brought trouble in a different form. Evelyn woke to shouting from downstairs. She dressed quickly and found Cole arguing with a man she didn't recognize, well-dressed, official-looking, holding papers. What's going on? She asked. The stranger turned to her with an expression of professional sympathy that immediately made her suspicious. Mrs. Bennett? I'm Howard Yates, Territorial Education Inspector. I'm here to evaluate your teaching activities. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Inspector? Yes. Several concerned citizens have filed complaints about unlicensed educational activities taking place on this property. It's my job to investigate and determine if those activities meet territorial standards. Silas sent you, Cole said flatly. Yates looked uncomfortable. I'm not at liberty to discuss who filed the complaints, but I'm required by law to inspect any educational facility operating in the territory. It's not a facility, Evelyn protested. It's just evening lessons for a handful of children. Any regular instructional activity falls under territorial jurisdiction, Yates replied, consulting his papers. You've been teaching approximately, he checked his notes, between 12 and 17 children on a consistent schedule for several weeks. That qualifies as a school, which requires proper licensing, certified instruction, and compliance with territorial education standards. This is ridiculous, Cole said. She's helping kids learn to read. I'm sure Mrs. Bennett's intentions are admirable. However, intention doesn't supersede law. Yates looked at Evelyn. Do you have teaching certification from any recognized institution? I taught in Chicago for 3 years. Chicago certification doesn't transfer to Montana territory without additional examination and licensing. Yates made a note. Do you have documentation of your Chicago credentials? Evelyn thought of Thomas Whitmore's lies, of the letter Silas had shown around town. No, my former employer wouldn't provide references due to circumstances. I see. More notes. And what curriculum are you following? I'm teaching basic literacy and arithmetic. Using approved territorial textbooks? I'm using whatever materials I can find. Books from the house, newspapers, catalogs. Yates was shaking his head. Mrs. Bennett, I sympathize with your situation, but you're operating an unlicensed educational facility without proper credentials, approved materials, or regulatory compliance. I'm going to have to shut down your teaching activities pending a formal review. You can't do that, Sarah said from the stairs. She'd been listening and her face was flushed with anger. Miss Evelyn is a good teacher. I'm sure she is, young lady, but the law is the law. Yates turned back to Evelyn. You'll receive official notice within the week. Until then, all teaching activities must cease immediately. If you continue, you could face fines or legal action. He left before anyone could respond, climbing into a hired buggy and disappearing down the road toward town. Evelyn sat down heavily at the table. He's right. I don't have certification. I don't have credentials. I can't even get a reference from my previous employer. This is Silas, Cole said, pacing angrily. He couldn't beat us directly, so he found another way to attack. But it's legal, Evelyn pointed out. Everything Yates said is true. I'm operating without a license, without proper credentials. So we get you credentials, Martha said, coming in from the kitchen with coffee. There has to be a way. There is. Evelyn said slowly. I'd have to go to Helena, take the territorial teaching examination, provide references and documentation. She stopped, realizing the impossibility. Which I can't do because Thomas Whitmore destroyed my reputation, and my former employer won't even acknowledge I worked there. Then we fight it differently, Cole said. We argue that the children need education, and there's no other option for Miles. That won't work, Evelyn replied wearily. The law doesn't care about need, it cares about compliance, and I'm not compliant. Sarah had started crying quietly. Martha put an arm around her. What about the children? Sarah asked. What are they supposed to do? Nobody had an answer. The notice arrived 3 days later, official and uncompromising. Evelyn was ordered to cease all teaching activities immediately or face prosecution. She had 30 days to obtain proper licensing if she wished to continue. The parents who'd been sending their children were devastated. Several came to the ranch to plead with Evelyn to keep teaching, to ignore the order, to fight it somehow. But she knew that would only make things worse. I can't break the law, she told them. I'm sorry. I wish I could, but I can't. Mrs. Crawford cried. Emma was finally learning. She was so happy. I know. I'm so sorry. One by one, they left, and the ranch felt emptier than it had since Evelyn arrived. Sarah stopped smiling. She did her chores mechanically, barely speaking. At night, Evelyn could hear her crying in her room, and it broke her heart in ways she hadn't known were possible. This isn't fair, Sarah said one evening, her voice thick with tears. You didn't do anything wrong. I know, sweetheart, but sometimes the world isn't fair. I hate Silas Crow. I hate him so much. Sarah, he ruins everything. The child was nearly shouting now. He ruined the school, and he hurt Papa's ranch, and he made you sad, and I hate him. Evelyn pulled her close. I understand. I hate him too sometimes, but hating him won't change anything. Then what will? That was the question, wasn't it? What would change things? How did you fight someone who used the law itself as a weapon? How did you win when the game was rigged? Evelyn didn't have an answer. Cole tried to cheer her up over the next few days, but his efforts felt hollow. He suggested she could still teach Sarah privately, which was true, but felt like a consolation prize. Martha brought books she'd been saving, as if reading materials were the problem. But the real problem was the helplessness, the feeling that no matter what they did, Silas would find a way to destroy it. 1 week after the teaching ban, Evelyn was in town for supplies when she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. 2 of Silas's men were talking outside the general store, loud enough that she couldn't help but hear. Boss says the school was just the beginning, one said. Now he's going after Bennett's cattle contracts. Says he'll make sure no one buys from him. Can he do that? He controls the rail connections. He controls the buyers. Yeah, he can do that. The man laughed. Give it 6 months, Bennett will be broke. Then we'll see how long the fancy lady sticks around. Evelyn's hands tightened on her shopping basket. She wanted to confront them, to defend Cole, to do something, but she forced herself to keep walking. Making a scene wouldn't help. When she got home, she told Cole what she'd heard. His face went pale. He's going after the ranch. Can he really cut off your buyers? If he controls the rail access, yeah. Most of my contracts depend on getting cattle to market. If he blocks that, Cole sat down heavily. I'd have to drive the herd overland to a different rail line. That's a 3-week trip minimum. I'd lose half the herd to the journey. We'd never recover. There has to be something we can do. Like what? Cole's voice was bitter. Sue him? With what money? Report him? To who? The territorial government that Silas probably has connections with? We're not fighting a man, Evelyn. We're fighting a system that's designed to protect men like him. Martha had been listening from the kitchen. So we give up? I don't know, Cole admitted. I honestly don't know what else to do. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and tried to find a solution that didn't exist. Every path she could think of led back to the same wall. They had no power, no resources, no way to fight someone as entrenched as Silas Crow. Maybe coming to Montana had been a mistake after all. Maybe she'd just traded one impossible situation for another. Around midnight, she gave up on sleep and went downstairs. Cole was already there, sitting at the table with a whiskey bottle and a haunted expression. Can't sleep either? She asked. He shook his head. Thinking about the ranch, about what happens if Silas makes good on his threat. What would happen? I'd lose everything, the land, the cattle, the house, everything my family built. He took a drink. And you and Sarah and Martha would have nowhere to go. We'd figure something out. Would we? Cole looked at her. Where would you go, Evelyn? Back to Chicago? To another frontier town where no one knows you? How long before Silas's reach extends there too? Men like him have long memories and longer connections. So what are you saying? We just let him win? I'm saying maybe we don't have a choice. The defeat in his voice was worse than anger would have been. Maybe this is one fight we can't win. Evelyn sat down across from him. She thought about Thomas Whitmore, about how he'd won so easily because she'd been too scared to fight back, about how she'd run instead of standing her ground, about how that had felt, the shame, the helplessness, the knowledge that evil had triumphed simply because good people didn't know how to stop it. No, she said firmly. Cole looked at her. No what? No, we don't give up. No, we don't let him win. No, we don't accept that this is how things have to be. She leaned forward. I ran from Thomas Whitmore. I let him destroy my life because I didn't know how to fight back, and I've regretted it every single day since. I'm not doing that again. Evelyn, this is different. Is it really? Or is it just the same pattern with a different name? Powerful man uses his influence to destroy anyone who threatens him. Regular people too scared to stand against him. Evil winning because good gives up. She shook her head. I won't do it again. I can't. So what do you suggest? I don't know yet, but there has to be something. Some way to fight back that we haven't thought of. She reached across the table and took his hand. We're smart people, Cole. Together we've survived blizzards and sabotage and public humiliation. We can figure this out. Cole stared at their joined hands for a long moment. Then slowly, something shifted in his expression. Not hope exactly, but the absence of despair. All right, he said quietly. Let's think. They talked through the night, going over every angle, every possibility. The conversation circled and stalled and restarted. Martha joined them at some point, adding her own sharp observations. Even Sarah came down at dawn, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and listened to the adults try to solve an impossible problem. It was Sarah who finally said the thing that changed everything. Why don't we just tell everyone what Silas is doing? She asked. Like we did before, but bigger. We did tell everyone, Cole replied gently. The sheriff arrested him, remember? But that was just Black Ridge, Sarah persisted. What about everyone else? All the other towns, all the ranchers? If everyone knew what Silas was doing, he couldn't do it anymore. The adults looked at each other. She's right, Martha said slowly. Silas's power comes from information control. He tells people what he wants them to know. But what if we told them the truth first? How? Evelyn asked. We can't reach that many people. Newspapers, Cole said, sitting up straighter. There's a territorial newspaper in Helena. If we could get our story published there. They'd never print it, Martha interrupted. Silas probably advertises with them. They're not going to bite the hand that feeds them. Then we write our own, Evelyn said. The idea was forming as she spoke. We document everything Silas has done. The threats, the sabotage, the intimidation. We write it down, print copies, distribute them throughout the territory. That's insane, Martha said, but she was smiling. It's also brilliant. It's dangerous, Cole added. Libel laws are serious. If we can't prove what we're saying, then we make sure we can prove it, Evelyn said. We gather testimonies from everyone Silas has threatened. We document the fence cutting, the teaching ban, everything. We make it impossible to dismiss as lies. They spent the next 3 weeks doing exactly that. Evelyn wrote while Cole and Jack Harrison rode across the territory, talking to ranchers and families and anyone who'd been hurt by Silas's business practices. The stories poured in. Small ranchers driven out of business, workers cheated out of wages, families intimidated into silence. Piece by piece, they built a portrait of a man who'd corrupted an entire region through fear and greed. Martha somehow acquired a small printing press, Evelyn didn't ask how, and set it up in the barn. She and Sarah learned to operate it together, slowly and imperfectly, printing page after page of testimony. They titled it The Black Ridge Truth and planned to distribute 500 copies across Montana territory. It was reckless and possibly illegal and absolutely necessary. The night before they planned to start distribution, Silas's men came for them. Evelyn heard the horses first. She was in the barn organizing the printed pages when the sound of hoofbeats cut through the evening silence. Not the usual sound of a single rider, or even two. This was multiple horses, moving fast, coming straight for the ranch. Her heart kicked into double time. She dropped the papers and ran for the house. "Cole," she shouted, bursting through the door. "Riders coming!" He was already at the window, rifle in hand. Martha had Sarah behind her, one hand on the girl's shoulder, the other holding her own gun with steady familiarity. "How many?" Martha asked. "6, maybe 7, Cole replied, his voice tight. "All armed." The riders circled the house, their horses kicking up dust in the dying light. Evelyn recognized 2 of them as Silas's regular men. The others were strangers, hired guns, probably, brought in specifically for this. One of them dismounted and walked to the porch. He was tall and lean with a scar running down his left cheek, the kind of man who made violence his profession. "Bennett," he called out, "we need to talk." Cole opened the door but kept the rifle visible. "About what?" "About the little newspaper you've been working on. Mr. Crow would like you to reconsider publishing it." "Crow doesn't get a say in what I publish." The man smiled without warmth. "See, that's where you're wrong. Mr. Crow gets a say in everything that happens in this territory, and he's saying that if those papers get distributed, there's going to be consequences." "Threats now?" Cole's voice was dangerously quiet. "That's bold even for Silas. Not threats. Promises." The man gestured to his companions. "We're here to collect every copy you've printed. We're here to take that press. And we're here to make sure you understand that going against Mr. Crow is bad for your health." "You're not taking anything," Cole said. The man's hand moved toward his gun. "We can do this easy or hard, Bennett. Your choice." Before anyone could move, Martha stepped onto the porch beside Cole. Her rifle pointed directly at the scarred man's chest. "Here's another choice," she said calmly. "You boys turn around and ride back to whatever hole Silas pulled you from. Otherwise, I start shooting, and don't stop until my gun's empty." The man looked at her like she was an annoying insect. "Old woman, you don't want to—" Martha fired. The shot went past his ear close enough that he felt the heat. He stumbled backward, hand going to his gun, but 3 more rifles appeared in windows around the house. Jack Harrison and 2 other ranchers who'd been helping with the printing, positioned strategically in case exactly this happened. "Next one goes through your skull," Martha said conversationally. "Now get off our property." The scarred man looked around, calculating odds. 7 hired guns against 4 rifles and a barn full of potential cover. The math wasn't in his favor, especially since they'd lost the element of surprise. "This isn't over," he said, backing toward his horse. "Yeah, it is," Cole replied. "You tell Silas that if he sends anyone else to threaten my family, I'll kill them, and then I'll come for him." The men mounted and rode off, but not before one of them threw a torch toward the barn. It fell short, landing in dirt and sputtering out harmlessly, a warning of what could have happened. After they were gone, Evelyn realized she'd been holding her breath the entire time. She let it out in a shaky exhale. "That was too close," Jack said, climbing down from his perch in the loft. "They'll be back with more men." "I know," Cole said grimly, "which means we need to move fast. Get those papers distributed tonight, before Silas can organize another attack." "Tonight?" Evelyn looked at the sky. The sun was already setting. "We can't distribute 500 papers in the dark." "We can make a start," Martha said. "Hit the biggest towns first, Helena, Butte, Virginia City, places where Silas's influence is weaker. Once the story's out there, he can't stop it." Cole turned to Jack and the other ranchers. "You willing to help?" "Wouldn't be here if I wasn't," Jack replied. The others nodded agreement. They worked through the night, organizing papers into bundles for each town, planning routes that would avoid Silas's men. Sarah helped tie the bundles with string, her small face serious and determined. "I want to come," she said when Cole started loading the wagon. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "But, Sarah." Cole knelt down to her level. "I need you here protecting the ranch with Martha. Can you do that?" Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but she nodded. "I can do that. That's my girl." He hugged her tightly. "We'll be back by morning." Evelyn, Cole, and Jack took the first wagon toward Helena. 2 other ranchers took a second wagon toward Butte. The plan was simple. Drop bundles at central locations, anywhere people gathered, general stores, saloons, churches, train stations, places where information spread quickly. The night ride was tense. Every shadow could hide Silas's men. Every sound could be an ambush. But they made it to Helena just before dawn without incident. The territorial capital was bigger than Black Ridge, busy even at early hours with miners and railroad workers. Cole and Jack distributed papers while Evelyn posted copies on public boards. They worked fast, drawing a few curious looks, but no interference, until Sheriff Wade found them. Evelyn's stomach dropped when she saw him ride up. She'd thought Helena was outside his jurisdiction, but apparently word traveled fast. "Bennett," Wade said, dismounting. He looked tired, older than he had during the confrontation with Silas. "I'm going to need you to stop what you're doing." "Can't do that, Tom," Cole replied. "This is libel. Silas has already filed charges. If you distribute these papers, you're looking at prosecution. For telling the truth? For making accusations you can't prove in court." Wade sighed. "Look, I know Silas is no saint, but you're going about this the wrong way. Let the legal system handle it." "The legal system is owned by men like Silas," Evelyn said quietly. "You know that as well as we do." Wade looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "Maybe. But vigilante justice isn't the answer either." "We're not looking for vigilante justice," Cole said. "We're looking for people to know the truth, to make their own decisions about who they do business with. That's not illegal." "It is if what you're printing constitutes libel." "Then arrest us," Jack Harrison said, stepping forward. "Arrest all of us. See how that plays in the newspapers. See what story gets bigger, Silas's crimes or his attempt to silence his critics." Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up one of the papers and read it carefully. His expression grew darker with each paragraph. "All of this is true?" he asked finally. "Every word," Cole confirmed. "We have witnesses for everything in there." Wade folded the paper and put it in his coat. "I can't stop you. Not legally, not without proof these are lies. But Silas will come after you hard for this. You understand that?" "We understand," Evelyn said. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Then I suppose you better finish distributing them before he figures out what you're doing." He mounted his horse and turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I'm glad someone finally had the courage to stand up to him. I should have done it years ago." He rode away, leaving them standing in the empty street. "Did that just happen?" Jack asked, stunned. "Apparently," Cole replied. He looked at Evelyn and smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Come on, we've got more papers to distribute." By the time they returned to the ranch that evening, they'd delivered papers to every major town within a 50-mile radius. Other ranchers were handling the more distant locations. Within a week, everyone in Montana Territory would know exactly what kind of man Silas Crow was. Martha and Sarah had dinner waiting, and the relief on their faces when the wagon pulled up made Evelyn's throat tight. "Any trouble?" Martha asked. "Nothing we couldn't handle," Cole replied, climbing down. He looked exhausted but satisfied. "It's done. The story's out there now." Sarah ran to hug him. "Did people believe it?" "Some did, some didn't. But they all know now." He picked her up, ignoring how heavy she was getting. And that's what matters. They ate dinner together, all of them too tired to talk much but comfortable in the shared silence. Evelyn kept waiting for another attack, for Silas's men to come riding back with reinforcements. But the night stayed quiet. It was 2 days later when the real response came. Evelyn was feeding the chickens when she heard shouting from the direction of town. She looked up to see a crowd coming down the road, not threatening exactly, but numerous and determined. Cole came out of the barn, saw the crowd, and tensed. But as they got closer, Evelyn realized these weren't Silas's men. These were families, ranchers, townspeople, at least 30 of them, maybe more. Mrs. Crawford was at the front, along with Jack Harrison and several others Evelyn recognized from Black Ridge. "We came to help," Mrs. Crawford announced when they reached the ranch. "Silas is trying to organize people against you. He's calling emergency town meetings, pressuring businesses to denounce your paper as lies. We figured you shouldn't face that alone." "We're with you," Jack added. "All of us. Whatever happens." Cole looked at the assembled crowd, clearly struggling with emotion. You don't have to do this. Standing with us could cost you, we know, interrupted a man Evelyn recognized as the blacksmith. We've all been afraid of Silas for too long. You showed us we don't have to be. Now we're showing him that there's more of us than there are of him. More people kept arriving throughout the day. By evening, there were nearly 70 people camped around the Bennett Ranch. They brought food, supplies, weapons, turned the isolated property into a small settlement. Children played together while adults shared stories of how Silas had wronged them over the years. Someone brought a fiddle, and music drifted through the evening air. It felt less like preparing for war and more like a community finally coming together. Sarah was in heaven. She ran between groups of children, laughing and playing with a freedom Evelyn had never seen in her before. This was what childhood was supposed to look like, loud and messy and joyful. This is incredible, Evelyn murmured to Martha, watching it all. This is what happens when people stop being afraid, Martha replied. Fear's a powerful weapon, but it only works if people stay isolated. Once they come together, once they realize they're not alone. She shook her head. Silas's worst nightmare is happening right here. That night, Cole called everyone together for a meeting. They gathered in front of the house, faces lit by firelight, waiting to hear what came next. I want to thank all of you for coming, Cole began, for standing with us. It means more than I can say. But I need you to understand what you're risking. Silas Crow isn't going to back down just because we printed some papers and gathered some support. He's going to fight back, and he's going to fight dirty. People could get hurt. Businesses could be ruined. Families could be threatened. We know, Jack Harrison said. We're here anyway. I just want to make sure everyone understands what they're signing up for, Cole continued. This isn't a game. This is going to get ugly. It's already ugly, Mrs. Crawford replied. It's been ugly for years. We're just finally doing something about it. The crowd murmured agreement. Evelyn stood and moved beside Cole. We have a plan, she said, her voice carrying across the assembled group. But it requires everyone's help. The papers we distributed were just the beginning. Now we need people in every town, every settlement to spread the word, to share their own stories, to make it impossible for Silas to control the narrative. We also need documentation, Cole added. Every interaction with Silas or his men, written down and witnessed. Every threat, every intimidation tactic, everything. We build a case so strong that even the territorial government can't ignore it. And we need to support each other, Evelyn continued. If Silas threatens someone's business, we find them new customers. If he cuts off supplies, we share what we have. We become the community he's tried to prevent us from being. It's going to take time, Cole warned. Weeks, maybe months. And it's going to be hard. But if we stick together, if we refuse to be divided by fear, we can outlast him. We're in, Jack said simply. Whatever it takes. The crowd echoed his sentiment. Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. These people, most of whom had been strangers just months ago, were willing to risk everything for something that felt bigger than any of them individually. They spent the next week organizing. Groups were assigned to different towns. Communication networks were established. People shared resources and information. Slowly, methodically, they built a structure that would be hard for Silas to dismantle. And during that time, Silas made his move. He couldn't attack them directly, not with so many witnesses camped at the Bennett Ranch. So he attacked their livelihoods instead. Ranchers allied with Evelyn and Cole suddenly found their cattle contracts canceled. Store owners who'd distributed the papers lost their suppliers. Workers who'd spoken against Silas were fired. It was systematic and brutal, designed to break their resistance through economic starvation. But the community adapted. Ranchers formed a cooperative and sold directly to consumers, cutting out the middlemen Silas controlled. Store owners ordered supplies from other territories. Workers found employment with the growing number of people who'd turned against Silas. It wasn't easy. Some families couldn't weather the financial pressure and had to back down. Evelyn watched them leave with guilt eating at her heart, knowing their suffering was because they'd supported her. This is my fault, she told Cole one night after watching another family pack up to leave. If I just stopped teaching when Yates ordered me to, then Silas would have won, Cole interrupted firmly. And he would have kept winning, kept controlling, kept hurting people. What's happening now isn't your fault. It's his. Don't let him make you think otherwise. But the guilt remained, a constant weight on Evelyn's chest. Sarah felt it too. She'd stopped playing as much, spent more time watching the adults with worried eyes. One night, she came to Evelyn's room after a particularly difficult day. "Are we bad people?" she asked quietly. "What?" "No, sweetheart, of course not. But people are getting hurt because of us, because of the school and the papers and everything." Evelyn pulled her close. "Listen to me. People are getting hurt because Silas Crow is a bully who uses his power to control others. We didn't start this fight. We just stopped pretending it wasn't happening. And yes, that's causing pain right now. But sometimes things have to get worse before they can get better." "How do you know they'll get better?" "I don't," Evelyn admitted. "But I know that doing nothing wasn't working. People were suffering in silence, too afraid to speak up. At least now they're suffering together, fighting together. That has to count for something." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I think you're the bravest person I know." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm not brave, Sarah. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference." "Mama used to say brave people are just stubborn people who don't know when to quit." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She wondered what Cole's first wife would think of all this. The danger, the conflict, the risk to her daughter. Would she approve? Would she think Evelyn was being reckless? "Your mama was a smart woman," Evelyn said finally. "I think she would have liked you," Sarah replied. "Papa does." "I can tell." Before Evelyn could respond to that, they heard shouting from outside. Both of them rushed to the window. Fire. The barn was burning. Evelyn's heart stopped. The printing press was in there. All the remaining papers, evidence they'd been collecting, everything they'd built. Cole was already running toward the barn with buckets. Jack and others joined him, forming a water line from the well, but the fire was spreading fast, unnaturally fast. This wasn't an accident. "Stay here," Evelyn told Sarah, then ran outside to help. The heat was intense, driving them back even as they threw water on the flames. Through the smoke, Evelyn could see that the barn was lost. All they could do was prevent it from spreading to other buildings. It took 2 hours to control the fire. By the time they finished, the barn was a smoking ruin. The printing press was destroyed, all their hard work gone. Martha stood looking at the wreckage with tears running down her soot-stained face. "He did this. Silas did this." "We don't know that," Cole said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Who else?" Martha turned on him. "Who else would sneak onto our property and burn our barn? This was a message." She was right, of course. They all knew it. This was Silas showing them that he could still hurt them, could still destroy what they built, could still reach them despite their numbers and their solidarity. The gathered supporters looked shaken. Some were already talking about leaving, about how this had gone too far. Evelyn couldn't blame them. They'd signed up to distribute papers, not to watch their lives burn. Cole stood in front of the ruined barn, his face illuminated by the dying embers. He looked defeated in a way Evelyn had never seen. She walked over to him. "We can rebuild." "With what?" "The press is gone. The papers are gone. We don't have money for new equipment." "Then we find another way." "Evelyn, no." She grabbed his arm, forced him to look at her. "We don't give up. Not now. Not after everything we've been through, everything these people have sacrificed." She gestured to the crowd. "We find another way." "What other way?" Cole's voice was raw. "We had one weapon against Silas, and he just burned it." "The weapon isn't a printing press," Evelyn said fiercely. "It's the truth. It's people knowing what he's done and refusing to accept it. That can't be burned." Cole stared at her, and she watched something shift in his expression. Not hope, not yet, but the absence of complete despair. "You're right," he said slowly. "The story's already out there. Destroying the press doesn't destroy what people already know." "Exactly. And we keep spreading it. Word of mouth, written testimonies, whatever it takes. He can burn our barn, but he can't burn what's in our heads and our hearts." Around them, the crowd had been listening. Mrs. Crawford stepped forward. "She's right. My Emma knows how to read now because of you. That can't be taken away. And I'll make sure everyone I know understands what Silas tried to destroy. Not just a barn, but hope. But he failed because we're still here." "We're still here," Jack echoed. "And we're not leaving." One by one, people affirmed their commitment. Not everyone. Some families quietly packed up and left that night, and Evelyn couldn't blame them. But enough stayed. Enough stood firm. As dawn broke over the smoking ruins of the barn, they gathered together and made a new plan. No printing press this time, but something more fundamental. They would organize town meetings in every settlement. They would share stories directly, person to person. They would build a network of communication that couldn't be destroyed by fire or threats. It was slower. It was harder. But it was also more personal, more human. Impossible to dismiss as just propaganda when it came from your neighbor's mouth, from someone you knew and trusted. Silas tried to counter it. He held his own meetings, offered incentives to people who denounced the lies being spread about him. But too many people had their own stories now. Too many had experienced his cruelty firsthand. The tide was turning. 3 weeks after the barn burning, Sheriff Wade rode out to the ranch with news. "The territorial governor is sending an investigator," he announced. "Too many complaints have reached Helena. Too many people corroborating the same stories. They're opening an official inquiry into Silas's business practices." "Will it actually lead anywhere?" Cole asked skeptically. "Maybe. Maybe not. Government moves slow, and Silas has friends in high places." Wade's expression was grim. "But it's something. It's acknowledgement that the complaints are credible. That alone damages his reputation." "How's he taking it?" Martha asked. "Not well. He's been in town ranting about conspiracies and persecution, threatening lawsuits, making wild accusations." Wade shook his head. "Honestly, he's starting to seem unhinged. People are noticing." After Wade left, Evelyn felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in weeks. They weren't there yet, but they were making progress. Silas's power was cracking, but as Martha always said, a cornered animal was the most dangerous kind. That night, Silas came to the ranch himself. He rode up alone, no hired guns, no backup, just a man on a horse, looking older and more haggard than Evelyn remembered. Cole met him on the porch, rifle ready, but not raised. "Came to talk," Silas said, his voice hoarse. "Not to fight, just to talk." "So talk." Silas dismounted slowly, like his body hurt. Up close, Evelyn could see the toll recent events had taken. His clothes were still expensive, but rumpled. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands shook slightly. "You won," he said simply. "You destroyed everything I built. My reputation, my business, my standing. You won." "This wasn't about winning," Cole replied. "It was about stopping you from hurting people. And you did. Congratulations." Silas's voice was bitter. "I came to ask what it'll take for you to stop. What you want to call this finished." "We want you to leave," Evelyn said, stepping onto the porch beside Cole. "Leave Montana. Leave these people alone. Let them rebuild without your shadow hanging over them." Silas laughed, a broken sound. "Just like that? Abandon everything?" "You destroyed everything yourself," Cole said. "We just help people see it." "I built this territory," Silas said, his voice rising. "I brought money and development and opportunity. Everything people have here, they have because of me." "They have it in spite of you," Martha said from the doorway. "You built an empire on fear and exploitation. That's not opportunity. That's slavery with extra steps." Silas's face flushed red. "You self-righteous hypocrites. You think you're better than me? You think your poverty and your moral superiority makes you noble? I gave people jobs. I gave them purpose. I made something out of nothing." "You made yourself rich by keeping others poor, son," Evelyn said quietly. "That's not building. That's stealing." For a moment, Silas just stared at her with such hatred that Evelyn took an involuntary step back. Then he seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of him. "I won't leave," he said finally. "This is my territory. I earned it, but I'll back off. Stop interfering. Let you people have your little rebellion." He looked at Cole. "Is that enough?" "For now," Cole replied carefully. "But if you go back on your word, if you hurt anyone else, we'll finish what we started. And next time, there won't be a conversation." Silas nodded once, mounted his horse, and rode away. They watched him disappear into the darkness. "Think he means it?" Martha asked. "No," Cole said, "but I think he's scared enough to behave for a while. That'll have to be good enough." Evelyn wasn't so sure. Men like Silas didn't change their nature just because they lost a fight. But she also knew they'd bought themselves time. Time to strengthen their community, to build something Silas couldn't easily tear down. And sometimes, time was all you needed. The territorial investigator arrived 6 weeks later. His name was Marcus Webb, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a briefcase full of papers. He set up office in Black Ridge's only hotel and spent 3 weeks interviewing witnesses, reviewing documents, and documenting everything Silas had done over the past decade. Evelyn testified on the 4th day. She sat across from Webb in that cramped hotel room and told him everything about the teaching ban, the threats, the barn burning, about how Silas had used fear as a weapon more effectively than any gun. Webb listened without interrupting, taking notes in precise handwriting. When she finished, he removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "Mrs. Bennett," he said carefully, "I want you to understand something. What you've documented here is extensive and damning, but Mr. Crow has resources. He has lawyers. He has friends in the territorial government who owe him favors." He paused. "Even if I recommend prosecution, there's no guarantee anything will happen." "So we did all this for nothing?" Evelyn's voice came out sharper than she intended. "I didn't say that." Webb put his glasses back on. "What you've done is create a record, official testimony that can't be erased or dismissed. Even if Crow avoids prosecution, his reputation is destroyed. His business relationships are damaged. His ability to intimidate people is broken." He looked at her directly. "Sometimes that's the real victory. Not putting someone in jail, but making sure everyone knows exactly who they are." Evelyn thought about that as she walked back to the ranch. Victory without vindication, justice without punishment. It felt incomplete, unsatisfying. But maybe Webb was right. Maybe the point wasn't destroying Silas, it was freeing everyone else from his control. Cole was waiting when she got home. He'd spent the day rebuilding the barn with help from Jack and several other ranchers. The new structure was smaller than the old one, rougher but functional. "How'd it go?" he asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Webb thinks Silas might avoid prosecution, but he also thinks we've already won the fight that matters." Cole nodded slowly. "Hard to feel like winning when the barn's still ashes and half the town's still scared." "Yeah." Evelyn sat down on the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. "But people aren't as scared anymore. That's something." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Inside, they could hear Martha teaching Sarah how to make bread, the two of them arguing good-naturedly about the right way to knead dough. "I've been thinking," Cole said after a while, "about the school." Evelyn looked at him. "What about it? You never got your territorial certification. You can't legally teach without it." He turned to face her. "So I think you should go to Helena. Take the examination. Get certified properly." "Cole, we can't afford not to. Those kids need education, and you're the best teacher they're going to get. But you need to do it right this time, legal and proper, so Silas or anyone like him can't shut you down again. That could take months. The examination, the waiting for approval, all of it. Then it takes months." Cole reached over and took her hand. "We're not in a hurry anymore. We can do things the right way now. The right way." Evelyn had spent so long fighting just to survive that she'd forgotten there could be a right way to do things, a path that didn't involve constant struggle and compromise. What about Sarah? And the ranch? Martha can watch Sarah. The ranch will keep. And Jack's offered to help with the heavy work while you're gone. Cole squeezed her hand. "You've sacrificed enough for this place. Let us sacrifice a little for you." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. "When did you become so reasonable?" "Probably around the time you became so stubborn." He smiled. "We balance each other out." She left for Helena 2 weeks later. The journey felt different this time, not running away but moving toward something. A future that existed beyond mere survival. The territorial teaching examination was harder than she expected. 3 days of written tests, practical demonstrations, and oral interviews with officials who seemed skeptical of a woman with a scandal in her past. But Evelyn had learned something important over the past months. Her past didn't define her unless she let it. When one examiner brought up the Chicago incident, she looked him straight in the eye and said, "I rejected a cruel man, and he punished me for it. That speaks to his character, not mine." The examiner blinked, made a note, and moved on. She passed. Not easily, not perfectly, but she passed. The official certification arrived 3 weeks later, stamped and legal and impossible to dismiss. When she returned to the ranch, there was a surprise waiting for her. The townspeople had built a schoolhouse. It wasn't much, a single room with rough benches and a blackboard someone had donated, but it sat on a piece of land just outside Black Ridge proper. Community property, Jack explained, purchased collectively by families who wanted their children educated. It's yours if you want it, Mrs. Crawford said, standing at the front of the small crowd that had gathered to show Evelyn the building. We figured the ranch was too far for some families, but this is central, accessible, and it's ours, not dependent on anyone's goodwill. Evelyn walked through the small building, running her hands along the rough walls. It smelled like fresh lumber and possibility. When can we start? She asked. Whenever you're ready, Mrs. Crawford replied. We've got 23 students enrolled already. More if word spreads that you're certified now. They opened the school 2 weeks later. That first day, Evelyn stood in front of 23 children ranging from 6 to 14, all of them looking at her with expectation and hope, and felt something settle in her chest. This was what she'd come here for, even if she hadn't known it at the time. Not just survival, not just escape, but purpose. Sarah sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Emma Crawford was next to her, already helping the younger children find their seats. Michael Harrison, now 12 and nearly as tall as his father, had brought his younger siblings. All right, Evelyn said, picking up a piece of chalk. Let's begin. Teaching in the new schoolhouse was different from teaching at the ranch. More formal, more structured, but also more sustainable. She taught 5 days a week, morning through early afternoon. Parents took turns bringing lunch. Martha came sometimes to help with the younger children, and slowly, almost without noticing, Evelyn's life became something resembling normal. Not easy. The frontier didn't do easy. There were still hard winters and crop failures and illnesses that swept through town. But there was also community, support, the sense that they were building something together that was bigger than any one person. Silas kept his distance. The territorial investigation had concluded with recommendations for further inquiry, but no immediate prosecution, exactly as Webb had predicted. But the damage to Silas's reputation was irreversible. Ranchers stopped doing business with him. His political allies distanced themselves. He became isolated, bitter, a cautionary tale about what happened when power corrupted completely. Evelyn sometimes saw him in town, always alone now, always looking smaller somehow. She didn't feel satisfaction at his fall, just a weary gratitude that he couldn't hurt people anymore. One evening, about 4 months after the school opened, Cole proposed. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching Sarah play in the yard with a neighbor's dog. It was spring now, the snow finally melted, everything green and alive. We should make this official, Cole said abruptly. Evelyn looked at him. Make what official? Us. This. He gestured vaguely at the ranch, the yard, the life they'd built. We've been married in name for almost a year now, but we never actually, we never made it real. Cole Bennett, is this a proposal? He had the grace to look embarrassed. I know it's backwards. Usually you propose before you get married, but nothing about us has been usual. That's true. Evelyn considered him. Why now? Because I want to, he said simply. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being a business arrangement and started being real. At least for me. He paused, suddenly uncertain. If you feel different, I understand. I know this isn't the life you imagined back in Chicago. No, Evelyn agreed. It's not. Cole's face fell. It's better, she continued. It's harder and stranger and more real than anything I imagined. And yes, I want to make it official. The relief on his face made her laugh. You really thought I'd say no? I thought you might have come to your senses by now. Too late for that. She leaned over and kissed him, gentle and brief. I lost my senses months ago. They were married properly 2 weeks later. Not a big ceremony, just a simple service in the schoolhouse with Martha and Sarah and the families who'd become their community. Sheriff Wade performed the ceremony, which felt appropriate somehow. The man who'd finally stood up to Silas, presiding over a marriage that Silas had tried to destroy. Sarah cried happy tears. Martha cried and pretended she wasn't. Jack Harrison gave a toast that was mostly inappropriate but made everyone laugh. And Evelyn stood next to Cole and realized she was happy. Not the shallow happiness of getting what you wanted, but the deep happiness of becoming who you were supposed to be. The school continued to grow. By fall, they had 32 students, and Evelyn had to hire an assistant teacher, a young woman from Butte who'd heard about the school and wanted to be part of something meaningful. By the following spring, they were discussing building an addition. Sarah flourished. The scared, quiet child who'd hidden upstairs that first night had transformed into a confident girl who helped younger students and dreamed of becoming a teacher herself someday. She still had nightmares occasionally, still missed her mother. But she'd learned that grief and happiness could exist in the same heart. Martha got older, but no softer. She maintained her acerbic commentary and a rifle, ready to defend what they'd built if anyone threatened it again. But she also started teaching some of the older girls practical frontier skills: how to shoot, how to survive, how to be strong. Cole's ranch stabilized. Without Silas controlling the markets, he found better buyers and fairer prices. The new barn was fully functional. The cattle thrived. He hired 2 ranch hands and started talking about expansion. And Evelyn taught. Day after day, year after year, watching children learn to read and write and think. Watching them transform from illiterate frontier kids into educated young people with possibilities their parents had never imagined. Some of them left Montana for universities back east. Some stayed and became ranchers, store owners, teachers themselves. But all of them carried the knowledge that education was power, and that power didn't belong to men like Silas Crow. It belonged to anyone willing to work for it. 3 years after that first difficult winter, Evelyn stood in the expanded schoolhouse and looked out at 47 students, 47 futures being shaped, 47 reasons why she'd been right to stand her ground instead of running. Mrs. Crawford's daughter, Emma, was now her assistant teacher, bright and capable and passionate about education. Jack Harrison's son, Michael, was studying to become a lawyer, planning to fight injustice in courtrooms instead of with rifles. Sarah, now 9, talked constantly about following in Evelyn's footsteps. After class that day, Cole came by to walk Evelyn home. He did that sometimes now, leaving the ranch work early just to spend extra time with her. "Heard some news in town," he said as they walked. "Silas is leaving Montana, selling what's left of his holdings and moving back east." "Good riddance," Evelyn replied without much emotion. Silas had become irrelevant to her life, a chapter that was over. "People are saying you drove him out." "People are wrong. He drove himself out. We just stopped pretending he was something he wasn't." Cole smiled. "You've gotten philosophical in your old age." "I'm 29. Ancient." He took her hand. "But seriously, what you did here, what we all did, it matters. Not just the school, but the whole thing. Showing people they don't have to accept abuse just because someone has power." "We got lucky," Evelyn said. "It could have gone very differently." "But it didn't, and that's worth remembering." Cole stopped walking, turned to face her. "You know what the best part is? This is just the beginning. These kids you're teaching, they're going to change things, build things, make this territory better than we found it." Evelyn looked back at the schoolhouse, small but sturdy, full of voices and future. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think they are." That night, lying in bed next to Cole in the house that had become truly theirs, Evelyn thought about the woman who'd stepped off that freight wagon 3 years ago. Desperate, broken, running from a scandal she hadn't created. That woman wouldn't recognize the person Evelyn had become. She'd learned that strength wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about breaking and getting up anyway. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. That the most radical thing you could do in a place built on intimidation was simply refuse to be intimidated. She'd learned that home wasn't a place you found. It was something you built piece by piece, with people who chose to stand beside you. And she'd learned that sometimes the thing you ran from ended up being the thing that saved you. Chicago's rejection had forced her to Montana. Montana's harshness had forced her to become strong. Silas's opposition had forced her to fight, and fighting had taught her who she really was. Not the proper Chicago lady who'd tried to fit into a mold that was never meant for her. Not the desperate woman who'd answered a mail-order marriage advertisement out of pure survival instinct, but someone in between. Someone who could teach children in the morning and ride through blizzards in the afternoon. Someone who could stand up to bullies and still be gentle with scared 6-year-olds. Someone who'd learned that you didn't have to choose between being soft and being strong. You could be both, in different moments, as the situation demanded. The woman the frontier couldn't break, because she'd learned to bend without breaking, to adapt without losing herself. to survive without sacrificing the parts of her that made survival worthwhile. Cole shifted beside her in sleep, his arm draped across her waist. Through the wall, she could hear Sarah breathing steadily in the next room, safe and loved and growing into whoever she was meant to be. Outside, Montana stretched in all directions, vast and harsh and beautiful, full of possibility for people brave enough to claim it. Evelyn closed her eyes and let sleep take her, confident that tomorrow would bring its own challenges and that she would face them the way she'd learned to face everything else. Head up, heart steady, surrounded by people who'd chosen to fight beside her. Not because the frontier had made her strong, but because she'd finally stopped letting anyone else decide what strength looked like. The seasons continued their cycle. Winter came again, as brutal as that first year, but no longer as terrifying. They'd learned how to prepare, how to weather the storms, how to keep each other alive through the coldest nights. Spring brought renewal, summer brought growth, fall brought harvest. And through it all, the schoolhouse remained open, a beacon in the wilderness, proving that civilization wasn't about buildings or laws or proper society. It was about people caring for each other, teaching each other, refusing to let the hard world make them hard. 5 years after Evelyn arrived in Black Ridge, the school had expanded twice more. They now taught 63 students across multiple grade levels. The territorial government had officially recognized it as a model institution. Other communities were copying their approach. Emma Crawford had become a full teacher in her own right, running the younger students' classes while Evelyn focused on the older ones. Sarah, now 11, helped both of them with the natural teaching abilities she'd inherited from somewhere. The ranch thrived under Cole's management. He'd become a respected voice in territorial cattle associations, known for fair dealing and innovation. People came to him for advice on breeding stock and winter preparation. Martha had finally slowed down a bit, but remained the sharp-tongued conscience of their community. She ran a women's group that taught practical skills and served as an informal support network for families in trouble. And Evelyn taught. Day after day, year after year, watching the community's children grow into adults who'd never known a time when education wasn't available to them, who took for granted things their parents had fought for. That was progress, she thought. When the things you struggled for became so normal that the next generation couldn't imagine life without them. One afternoon in late spring, 7 years after that first desperate winter, a familiar figure rode up to the schoolhouse. Sheriff Wade, older now, and planning retirement, climbed down from his horse with the careful movements of a man whose body had started reminding him of his age. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, tipping his hat. "Got something for you." He handed her an official-looking envelope. Evelyn opened it carefully, confused about what could possibly require formal delivery. It was a letter from the territorial governor. Not a form letter, but something personal and handwritten. "Dear Mrs. Bennett," it read, "I'm writing to commend you for your extraordinary service to Montana Territory. Your school has become a model for education throughout our region. More importantly, your courage in standing against corruption and intimidation has inspired countless others to demand better from their communities and their leaders. As we move toward eventual statehood, it is citizens like you who make me believe we can build something worth being proud of. With gratitude and respect." Evelyn read it twice, not quite believing it. "He sent copies to all the territorial newspapers," Wade explained. "Wanted people to know that what you did here mattered, that standing up to bullies isn't just brave, it's what builds civilization." "I didn't do it for recognition," Evelyn said quietly. "I know, that's why you deserve it." Wade smiled. "Thought you should know, Silas died last month, back in Philadelphia, alone from what I heard. Never recovered from losing everything here." Evelyn waited to feel something, satisfaction, vindication, even pity. But all she felt was tired sadness for a man who'd built his life on the wrong foundation. "That's unfortunate," she said. "You're more gracious than I'd be." Wade glanced at the schoolhouse, where children's voices could be heard reciting lessons. "But I suppose that's the difference between you and him. He spent his life taking. You spent yours giving. In the end, that's what matters." After Wade left, Evelyn stood outside the schoolhouse for a long time, holding that letter and thinking about the strange path her life had taken. From disgraced Chicago teacher to frontier wife to community leader, from running away to standing ground, from survivor to teacher to something she'd never expected to be. An example. She thought about all the women who might hear her story and find courage in it, about all the people facing their own Silas Crows, wondering if resistance was possible, about whether one person refusing to give up could actually change anything. The answer, she'd learned, was complicated. One person alone couldn't change the world, but one person could inspire two people, who could inspire four, who could inspire eight. And eventually, if enough people decided to stand together, the world had no choice but to change. That was the real lesson. Not that heroes could save everyone, but that everyone could be a hero in small, persistent ways. By refusing to accept cruelty, by teaching children, by standing beside your neighbors when they faced injustice, by being stubborn enough to believe that things could be better, and brave enough to work toward that belief even when it seemed impossible. Cole found her there, still holding the letter, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Yeah." She showed him the letter. "The governor thinks I'm inspirational." Cole read it, his expression shifting from surprise to pride. "He's right. I'm not inspirational. I'm just stubborn." "Same thing." He put his arm around her shoulders. "But for what it's worth, you inspired me. That first winter when you insisted on riding into the blizzard to help with the cattle, I thought you were insane, but you showed me that sometimes insane and brave look identical until you know how the story ends." "And how does this story end?" Evelyn asked. Cole smiled. "It doesn't. That's the best part. The school keeps growing, the kids keep learning, the community keeps getting stronger. This isn't an ending, it's a beginning that keeps beginning." He was right, Evelyn realized. There was no neat conclusion, no moment when everything was finally fixed and perfect, just the ongoing work of building something worth having. Day after day, year after year, one lesson and one act of courage at a time. That night, the whole community gathered for a celebration. Someone had leaked word of the governor's letter, and people wanted to mark the occasion. There was food and music and dancing. Children ran wild in the evening light. Adults laughed and shared stories. Sarah danced with her friends, nearly 12 now, and on the edge of that transformation from childhood to something else. Emma Crawford was deep in conversation with a young rancher who clearly had intentions beyond discussing cattle. Martha presided over the food table like a benevolent tyrant, making sure everyone ate. And Cole stood beside Evelyn, watching it all with satisfaction. "This is what we fought for," he said quietly. "Not the letter or the recognition. This. People living without fear, kids having futures, community." "Worth it?" Evelyn asked. "Every second." He looked at her. "Even the hard parts, especially the hard parts, because they made this possible." Evelyn thought about that, about how the hardest winters had taught them resilience, how fighting Silas had taught them courage, how nearly losing everything had taught them what actually mattered. The easy path would have been safer, but it wouldn't have led here, to this moment, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand together instead of fall apart. As the celebration continued around them, Evelyn felt something she'd never quite felt before. Not happiness exactly, though there was plenty of that. Not satisfaction, though that was present too. It was peace. The bone-deep knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. That the broken woman who'd fled Chicago had found not just a new life, but herself. That running away had somehow become standing ground. That survival had transformed into purpose. She thought about young women in other towns, in other territories, facing their own impossible situations. Women running from scandals or abuse, or simply the suffocating limitations of what was considered proper. Women who believed they had no choices left. If they could hear her story, what would they learn? Not that everything would work out, not that frontier life was easy or that standing up to bullies always succeeded, not that courage was simple or that hard work guaranteed happiness. But maybe they'd learn that running away wasn't the same as giving up, that starting over was always possible, even when it seemed impossible. That strength came in unexpected forms. That community mattered more than individual heroism. That the person you became was more important than the person you'd been. Most importantly, maybe they'd learn that their worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions. That a scandal didn't define them. That rejection wasn't failure. That the thing that broke them could also be the thing that remade them into someone stronger. The music played on. The children laughed. The adults danced and talked and celebrated. not just Evelyn's recognition, but their own collective victory. The victory of ordinary people refusing to accept that power and cruelty were inevitable. And Evelyn stood in the center of it all, holding Cole's hand, watching Sarah twirl with joy, feeling Martha's approving presence nearby, surrounded by the community they'd built together, the family they'd chosen, the home they'd created out of nothing but stubbornness and hope and the radical belief that things could be better. The woman who'd arrived with nothing but shame had become the woman who'd helped build something worth having, not through being perfect, not through never failing or struggling or doubting, but through getting up every time she fell, through choosing courage over comfort, through refusing to let the world's hardness make her hard, even when softness felt like weakness. She'd learned the most important lesson the frontier could teach. Survival wasn't the goal. It was just the beginning. The goal was living in a way that made survival worthwhile, building something that outlasted you, teaching children who'd teach other children, creating ripples that spread outward, touching lives you'd never know. The goal was proving that one person standing up could inspire others to stand, that speaking truth mattered even when power tried to silence it, that communities built on mutual support were stronger than empires built on fear. That was the real victory. Not defeating Silas Crow, though that had been necessary, but creating something that made men like Silas Crow irrelevant, a world where their threats had no power because people had learned to rely on each other instead of being divided by fear. As the stars came out above Montana's vast sky, Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed in the cool evening air. She heard children laughing, adults talking, music playing. She felt Cole's hand warm in hers, felt the solid ground beneath her feet, felt the strength in her own body that had been forged through hardship and choice. And she understood, finally, what home really meant. Not a place where everything was easy, not a life without struggle or pain or doubt, but a place where you belonged, where your struggles mattered, where pain could be shared and doubt could be overcome together. A place worth fighting for. The woman who'd arrived in Black Ridge 7 years ago wouldn't have recognized the person Evelyn had become. That woman had been running, hiding, hoping to disappear into anonymity and safety. This woman stood in the light, celebrated and recognized, leading a community she'd helped build. That woman had been defined by her past, by Thomas Whitmore's lies, by Chicago's rejection. This woman was defined by her choices, by the children she taught, by the stand she'd taken. That woman had believed she had no power, no options, no future worth having. This woman had learned that power came from within, that options were created through courage, and that the future was whatever you were brave enough to build. The transformation hadn't been sudden or magical. It had been gradual, painful, earned through countless small decisions to stand instead of flee, to fight instead of surrender, to hope instead of despair. But it was complete. And as the celebration continued around her, as Montana's night settled over the community that had become her home, Evelyn Mercer Bennett understood that she'd finally become the woman she was always meant to be. Not despite the hardship, but because of it.